Okay, good afternoon everybody. I am so glad to see you all here. I'm glad to see all of my students and then some. And first of all, I am so excited to see such a wide variety of and different ranks of Colorado Springs Police Department here. Of course, most of you know that I am Dr. Henrik Kovier. I'm an Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice here at the School of Public Affairs. Thank you again for everybody from Colorado Springs Police Department for coming. I really, really appreciate it, and so does our students and our faculty who are present here today. So let's get this party started. What we are hoping that you guys would do, first, maybe you could introduce yourselves really shortly, just kind of let us know who you are, what your rank is, or if you are civilian within the police department, what it is that you do. Kind of how did you get there? What is your background story? If you went straight from the college to the police department, or maybe you did some military before, or how it is that you got where you're at in your career. And then I kind of moderate, after we go through the whole entire table, I will kind of ask you some questions. Our students emailed me some questions ahead of time. So I have some questions that are prepared for you. And then in the very end, there will be a 30 minutes that the students will have that they can ask you any questions that they want that may come up during this panel that interesting. But also I will guide some of the conversations. So the purpose of initially this panel was we wanted to know what your opinion is on how people become criminals. A few weeks ago we heard from the offender's perspective. Why? So this class, first of all, is a criminological theory class. So we learn all about the different criminological theories that try to explain why people become criminals and why people become offenders, right? So for the whole entire semester, we have been learning all about these different academic perspectives and theories on why people may become criminal, why do people become offenders. And so we also heard a couple of weeks ago from the offenders themselves, from different individuals who have been in prison for multiple years. I think one of them had been in prison for 23 years, one had been in prison for 30 years, and so forth. So we heard their perspective on why they believe that they have become offenders. So I thought that it would be incredibly interesting to hear your professional perspective on why do you think, based on your different experiences in patrol, through the investigations, maybe through victim services and so forth, why do you think that people become offenders? But before we even get there, we would love to hear, how did you choose this field in the first place? So why don't we start with Rod, who is also a senior instructor here with the School of Public Affairs. And so without further ado, Rod.
Good morning. I know a lot of you, so I'll keep it short because I really want you to meet the fine men and women of Colorado Springs Police Department. They took their time here to talk to you today and to be open and honest with you, and that's a big thing. I spent 34 years in law enforcement. I retired 3 years ago as Deputy Chief of the Police Department, and I'm a graduate from this university with a master's degree.
Brian Cummings, currently I'm the supervisor of the K9 unit, supervise 9 guys that work dual purpose dogs, patrol and narcotics. I started my career right out of college like some of you guys aspired to do. I got hired on with the Department of Corrections with Colorado, spent a year at the Department of Corrections, went on to Lakewood Police Department, spent 2.5 years in Lakewood, Colorado before I came down here. I worked Sand Creek Division, Stetson Hills Division, Falcon Division. I worked as a neighborhood resource officer, a school resource officer. I was promoted 6 years ago, spent just short of 2.5 years in patrol, working all those divisions, and I've been in the K9 unit for the past 4 years. I also work a patrol and narcotics certified dog.
My name is Monty Dennis, and I am the coordinator for the Victim Advocacy Unit with the Police Department. So before working at the police department, I got my bachelor's in psychology and my master's in forensic psychology, and I worked mainly with the chronically mentally ill in group home settings. Before working at the police department, I worked in a prison, and our department did psych assessments on all the offenders that came through. And so from there, I kind of shifted gears and started with victim services for the police department.
My name is Adrian Vasquez. I started my law enforcement career, I guess, as straight out of high school in the military. I did several years in the military as a military cop. I went to the feds for a very short time. I was a police officer for the Treasury. And then I came back. I'm from Colorado, so I came back to Colorado Springs, where I got hired on with CSPD. I started out about 3 years in Sand Creek Patrol. As soon as I was able to, I tested for narcotics, and I spent the better part of the next 12 years in narcotics. The last 6 or 8 years unknown to the Drug Enforcement Administration. Once I promoted to lieutenant, I did a little bit of time on patrol, about six or 8 months back on patrol as a lieutenant, and am now the lieutenant over the violent crime section with CSPD. I oversee a couple homicide teams, robbery, violent assaults, and victim advocacy.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Taylor. I am the evidence supervisor for the Colorado Springs Police Department, and after getting my degree in criminal justice and sociology, I wasn't really sure how I wanted to apply that, so I worked some various types of jobs, like started in loss prevention, then I worked in a jail, then I worked in some law firms for a while, couldn't really figure out my groove. And I decided I was too nerdy to be a cop and didn't want to work as hard as being a lawyer, and working for a law firm was miserable. So I signed up for the police department because I still wanted to be involved in criminal justice. So I am a civilian, and I have worked for CSPD for about 13 years. I started in the comm center, and about a year later, a position opened up in the evidence unit, so I jumped at that opportunity because it was in the basement and it seemed like good nerdy work for me. And I have been there for 13 years, and now I'm the supervisor and love my job.
My name is Sergeant Chris Arson. I'm currently the supervisor for the Regional Explosives Unit of the Bomb Squad. I got started back in '94 in law enforcement. Was going to college, probably like many of you, didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. Was finishing up my degree in biological sciences, realized that I wasn't enough of a nerd to be able to pull that off and be in a small room all the time. Picked up a job part-time as a law enforcement officer on campus, and found that it really kind of appealed to me, being able to do the physical aspect of it, plus the mental and really the cerebral side of it as well, which kind of led me into the bomb squad end of it eventually. I spent time on patrol on our full-time tactical team, and then I've been with the bomb squad full-time since 2008, a short stint in there as a supervisory time in the field. But like I said, it really, for me, it was more of a mesh of being able to do the physical stuff, being outside. As you all know, I mean, sometimes we get to drive fast, shoot guns, do fun stuff like that. But to be able to use my brain as well. We're involved in, Jen and I were just talking about this, a lot of chemistry, a lot of physics, math. Who knew I would ever have to do math again? All that stuff, you know, my math teacher was telling me in high school, and now I'm doing these complex formulas trying to determine the physics of different IEDs and explosives and things like that. So it's really a good mesh for me overall, so that I'm not stuck in an office 10 hours a day, because that's what appealed to me.
My name is Chris Chenoweth. The guy sitting next to me is my boss. I'm on the bomb squad currently, so I'm trying to mind my P's and Q's, not offend people while he's here. Unlike Jennifer, I find that being a nerd and being a cop is a huge asset, so I own it. But I started out, I got my degree in criminal justice about 10 years or 11 years ago. While I was in college, I actually worked as an EMT. Figured out that medical stuff wasn't really for me, and so moved on to law enforcement. Actually got hired here 2 months after I graduated, and have been here ever since. Started out in patrol for 5 years, became a training officer and firearms instructor, went to investigations, general investigations at the division level for 4.5 years, and then spent the last year full-time with EOD. Like I said, the whole geek part of it and the chemistry and the physics and stuff like that's definitely what turned me on to that part. So it's a big bowl of ass.
My name is Stephanie Watkins. I'm a civilian physician. I work with the crime lab for the department. I'm a forensic chemist and a firearms examiner. And I basically got my start when I was in college as well. I have a bachelor's of science in chemistry with a minor in criminalistics. During my degree program, I had to complete an internship, so that's kind of how I got dialed into the crime lab setting, and I did that for a period of 2 years with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in Golden, Colorado. From there, I spent a little bit of time employed with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. I worked with their identification unit, and I got hired on in my current capacity.
My name is Jessa Chinham. I'm a crime scene investigator for the Colorado Springs Police Department. I got my degree from UCCS in criminal justice with the forensic option in 2012. I was fortunate enough to get an internship with the district attorney's office, in which helped me get to where I'm at today.
My name is Joel Kern. I've been on the Colorado Springs Police now for 18 years. And prior to that, I went to the University of Nebraska, Omaha. I got a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, and I was lucky. I got hired with CSPD right after college. Since that time, I've generally had an investigations background. I did general property crimes, then I went to sex crimes, crimes against children. Got promoted, and then spent 9 years on the road. And then for the last 3 years, I've been in internal affairs.
Hi, my name is Teresa Tomchek. Born and raised here in the Springs. I'm sure everybody who's born and raised here can't wait to get out. So I went away for college. I got a scholarship in track and cross country. I've always been pretty athletic. Once I left, had to come back. Didn't realize what I was missing here. I pretty much got hired right out of college. Always wanted to be on the SWAT team. That was kind of my goal. There was only one other female in the SWAT team prior to me coming to the department, so I knew it was going to be a pretty tough task. I was on patrol 8 years and finally got picked up by the SWAT team, or the Tactical Enforcement Team, that's what we're called. Been on that team for 3 years. I love it.
I'm Renee Henshaw. I am currently the manager of the Public Safety Communications Center, which is essentially your 911 dispatch center, who gets to tell all of these guys where to go and what to do most of the time. I've been with the department going on 18 years now, and I've held every position that you can in the communications center. Started out in the call taking, promoted to dispatch. I was the trainer for a couple years, then I went to a supervisor position, and I've been managing the center for the last 2.5 years. Graduated in '94 with a bachelor's in sociology and a minor in criminology. Didn't know what the heck I was going to do with it. Moved out here in '96 trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I kind of just fell into it. I think one of the things is nobody grows up as a little kid and says, I want to be a dispatcher. Didn't know much about it, but I had a friend that I went to college with that was doing it in Contra Costa County in California. And an opening came up in the Cripple Creek Police Department, and I thought, oh, I'll go see what that's all about. Worked there for a year, fell in love with it, got on down in the Springs in 1998, and it just became a passion. So I worked my way all the way up to the top. And so I'm here to answer any questions people have about that.
My name is Brian Barella, and I am a graduate student of Dr. Beers, and I am retired from the PD. I got medically retired, and some of these guys I was at the academy with and got to work side by side, and she got to tell me what to do and where to go, how fast to get it done. Laws and law enforcement, total about 15 years. Out of college, I went into the military. I was a criminal investigator, the Army, CID command. Got to do some drug work that wasn't as fun as the stuff I think Adrian was able to do, or as interesting. But majority of my work's kind of been investigations as well. I've been a property crimes detective here at the PD. I've been a school resource officer as well. In the military, I did a juvenile investigator in addition to supervisor of an investigations unit. So for me, my undergrad is not criminal justice. I was supposed to be working at Children's Hospital. Next thing you know, I'm out in the streets beating heads. Let's see, for me, I have a cheesy excuse why I did it. I really enjoyed helping those who couldn't help themselves. And seeing all these guys here just makes me miss it much more, so. Give me a holler, or come up and talk to me, or ask whatever you want to ask.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. I was trying to jot down your names as you went on and trying to make notes, but I only got about half of them down, so I apologize. So if I'll address a question, hey you, can you answer? I really apologize about that. So anyway, before I actually move on to the student questions, I kind of would like to address a little bit what this class is supposed to be all about. And it's supposed to be about why people become criminals. And obviously I think by now toward the end of the semester, I think the students and I have come to the conclusion that there probably is not a cut and dry, black and white answer, right? There's not just one criminological theory that can explain it. But we would really love to hear your perspectives on it. And your perspectives can probably differ too, depending on what you do for the police department. And they may even have changed from since you first came out of the academy or since you first started as a civilian for the police department. So kind of just, and if you don't want to answer or you don't have a perspective, you don't have to, but we can always start with Rod. I know that Rod definitely has a perspective on this. So, what do you think, Rod? What do you think is an answer to this burdening question? What makes somebody a criminal, in your professional opinion?
Well, what makes somebody a criminal is if they're convicted of a crime.
Well, in society's view, right? Because society is the one that ultimately defines what a crime is. But in terms of, I guess, what would be a better question, how we define antisocial behavior or deviant behavior in society? What would make somebody act in an antisocial ways? Ways that does not play with others, well with others in society.
Well, I'm going to really concentrate on letting a lot of other people answer that question. But for me, generally, much like Lieutenant Vasquez, I spend a lot of time in homicide. And ours isn't really to figure out why somebody does something. Ours is to figure out who did something and produce the evidence necessary for the truth. And really, I think from a police perspective, we did. And from an academic perspective, it's two different perspectives. You're all trying to figure out academically why these things happen. We're tasked with figuring out who and finding the truth in a situation and bringing that truth forward. And the truth sometimes can certainly eliminate somebody, and the truth can certainly implicate somebody. And really, that's the core of our being as police officers, and that's why all these individuals here are screened thoroughly and backgrounded because of their integrity, because it's an awesome responsibility. So generally, that's my answer to that. There's academic questions and there's police questions, so we're going to kind of come at it at the police side today. All sorts of reasons. You all know all the theories, or you should know all the theories by now. And I've seen them all apply with different suspects, depending on who I've been talking to. Some it's because of their background, some of it's because of their upbringing. Some I've seen that I think it's hereditary. Could be in the genes. We have crime families in this town that go back, and our crime analysts will tell you this, to when I started. And I can name I'm not going to name them, but I can name two individuals in this town who have their offspring, 3 of them are in jail for murder right now, just of their own offspring for murder. So I'll defer to some of the experts here.
Who would like to take it there?
I'll throw it out from an academic side, just because I know you guys have talked a lot about theory. Over the last several years, I've probably got a wider view of persons crimes, violent crimes against persons, which is generally what we think about it. I mean, we can look at the nexus between things like property crimes and the sale of property. They still sell that property for drug money, for example. and then we have drug deals that go bad. But from what Rod was saying, you know, we have these crime families. One of the things that theoretically that I like is the learning theories. Because we look at these families over and over, learning from other members of their families, and we have dad teaching son, and grandfather's been in prison, and so you can kind of look at it from that learning perspective. I kind of also like the rational choice theories, or like Merton's theory, you know, Naomi, those kinds of theories where we're talking about, okay, we learned this from a young age maybe, and transferred as we get older, we start seeing things that we want. And I think a lot of times, we look at homicides, for example, and very many of them are simply domestic violence situations that have gone wrong. But a lot of times it's about, you know, a person wanting something else, and I'm going to get it, and I don't have a means to get it legitimately, and so I kill somebody. And that is something that we see very often in my section when we look at violent crimes. Is I just want something, and I'm going to get it one way or another. I can't get it legitimately, so I'm going to do what I got to do to get it. And I just think that's what we see a lot of.
So, do you think that many times when, let's just talk about, for example, violent crime. So there's so many different types of crime, but in terms of the violent crime, do you think that in your experience, and anybody can jump in, the violent crime that you encounter, is there a lot of rational thinking or planning that goes into it, or in your experience, is lots of it sort of a spur of a moment kind of a thing that happens based on the circumstances that are taking place, like due to drugs and alcohol, for example, and whatever happens in that given moment? Or is it what we usually see in TV that is very well planned and thought of, and there's lots of thinking behind it and planned, careful choices made? Or what is your experience, specifically in terms of violent crime?
That's you, Adrian.
Is that me again? So I think we see everything. I think it is more often something that is more spur of the moment, something that is planned out to some great lengths. I don't think we see that as often, but we see it. So I think it's an opportunity generally, but it could be opportunity learned consistently, right? We see things. We see this type of person that maybe gets away with a theft, but they stole something based on opportunity, and then maybe it escalates into some form of violent crime. So I would say that's what we most often see, but we do have everything, we run the gamut of reasons and amount of planning and so forth.
I could offer
Yeah,
like a
please.
sex crimes perspective. When you're involved in sex crimes, there's so many misperceptions about that, where it's my view on sex crimes, the offenders are actually born that way. And they have a predisposition to offend against youngsters. And there's a lot of planning that goes into that. We call it the grooming behaviors, where an offender will groom people, sometimes for years, to enable them to be able to commit the act. Or they're at the bars and they meet whoever, and then they find out that whoever has like a 2-year-old daughter at home, well, they will date that woman in order to be able to get to the 2-year-old. So in the sex crimes world, I am convinced that you're born that way, and there's a lot of planning that goes into it. And again, it's funny to me too, because society as a large, people are worried about being on Monument Valley Trail and being raped in the middle of the afternoon or something. And while it's very rare that it does happen, very rare, you're actually more likely to be abused or someone commit a crime on you that you know, that you're friends with, a relative, neighbor, someone you meet at the bar. So that's that perspective. And I think it's interesting too, because it's not society, it's just like the way someone's wired about why they would commit that type of crime.
Absolutely. So again, we see here how, again, the typology is that not necessarily one single theory fits, again, a one single type of offender. We may need a multiple types of theories, not to only explain certain kind of crime, but different types of crimes. And again, how we have certain kind of stereotypes that media may perpetrate, that kind of, again, the stranger danger type of thing, while you certainly have to take certain kind of measures to protect yourself, it's often, especially with the violent sex criminals or sex criminals in general, it's often much closer to the home that you have to be worried about versus the whole stranger danger type of thing. Absolutely, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So, in terms of the sort of a lifespan of the criminal, we have learned about the different types of theories that are kind of taking proceedings or becoming much and much more popular over the traditional sociological based theories, such as social criminology and life course criminological theories. And what life course criminological theory, for example, says that the things that happen to you during childhood are very important in terms of what goes on later on in life, right? So, do you see that as a police officer or as a civilian employee of the police department, do you kind of come in contact with maybe the same offenders over and over and over again in the course of your careers? And if so, what are sort of the characteristics of these, what you would call a career criminals or persistent criminals, and what is the outlook for them? And is there anything that we can do to kind of intervene and stop them from having that chronic career of crime? Anybody? Go
I'll
ahead.
kind of jump in on part of that. I think it's a very complex answer to a relatively simple question, but I think it's going to be a different answer based on where you are in a particular space. Like when I did division investigations for Falcon Division, which is the northwest part of town. Generally speaking, it's a nicer part of town. It's fairly well-to-do. It's a pretty area, nice houses, nice community, things like that. And working property crimes, more often than not, the kids that we dealt with were from very well-to-do families. Certainly don't fit the typical mold that you would necessarily associate with criminal behavior. Supportive parents, a nice house to live in, possibly going to school or at least going in line to be in college, that sort of thing. And so it doesn't come from a really nasty neighborhood, doesn't come from a long line of criminal behavior or anything like that. But the one thing that really stuck out to me doing interviews with all these kids is a couple of things, in that they really didn't have any kind of confidence at all. And it was just something where they were provided for their every whim as a child growing up. And so they never really had to deal with any kind of conflict resolution. Never really had to deal with any kind of struggle. And so they didn't have to overcome anything as a result. And so once they started becoming young adults, they started getting into a social structure they weren't comfortable with, or they encountered some sort of difficulty. They just didn't have a mental template of being able to react with that. And so a lot of the kids who end up suffering from that kind of pressure would turn to either alcohol or drugs. And then that became the fuel for them to start committing ancillary crimes to that. And so it was, you could basically, it was one interview after another. I'd sit there and basically talk to the same kid, but with a different face, and same story, same background, and it was, it was predictable. Within 5 minutes, you could say the same thing to the same kids, and they'd break down and cry. It's like basically you'd say, I don't know a single person from your neighborhood who says, I'm really glad that I got hooked on heroin. And then it was like turning a light switch. They break down and say, yep, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. I can't believe I'm stealing from my grandmother. Can't believe I'm stealing from my little sister. I can't believe I'm stealing my brother's lunch money so I can go get a bump. That sort of thing. And I think that was particularly focused to a region of our city in that perspective, in that particular span of time, just because there was a couple classes from schools, and I'm pretty sure if you're from this area, you probably know a few of them, that had a really bad rash of drug use, and it's still happening. And that becomes a big area to feed the fire for secondary criminal behavior to start feeding the drug.
Absolutely. And that's almost opposite of what we are gotten used to learning about, where it's almost like when you don't have adversity in life, where you don't have enough obstacles, that you're not prepared for that adult life and that those stressors and those responsibilities. Whereas, we learn in a criminological theory is that when you have lots of adversity, you come from the inner city neighborhoods and you have lots of poverty and lots of strain and stressors, that's when the criminal behavior takes place. But in some cases, maybe having a certain level of strain and stressors and adversity can prepare you to be more resilient to those strains and stressors that you have to meet when you are actually an adult. So there has to be obviously a balance of that, right? So that's very interesting. You talk about the drug use, so that kind of takes me to the next question that I have. How much do you see secondary crime coming out of that is directly related to the substance abuse issues, that you are convinced that that person would likely, at least, obviously you can't predict with 100% certainty, but if that person would be sober, they likely would be pro-social citizen, but they would likely not be engaging in criminal behavior, but that criminal behavior is very likely related directly to their substance abuse issues, whether it's that they are financing their substance abuse issues or directly engaging in selling drugs or obtaining drugs or whatever.
Just piggybacking off of what I was just saying, I have a conservative estimate, probably about 3/4 to 80% of the people that I talk to, the primary reason that they're doing taking stuff from other people is because of feeding a drug abuse problem. Ever since there have been people and there has been stuff, people have been wanting to take other people's stuff. So, it's certainly not, new to the human condition, but a lot of the kids especially the kids, 18, 19, 20 somethings that I would talk to, most of them are really nice kids. They're not bad people. It's just they have this insatiable need for the narcotics that they just can't fill, and so they just steal anything and everything they can, as long as it's not bolted to the floor, it's fair game. So, again, probably at least 3/4 of the cases that I worked, there was some sort of drug nexus.
And I absolutely agree with him. Working in the victim services field and previously in the offender field, what common theme I have seen both is trauma. And so trauma is so complex and so many times that it really changes the way our perspective in life. Sometimes it even has a huge factor in our personalities at times, depending on how much trauma we've been exposed to, at what age, or those formidable years, things like that. And so when it comes to substance abuse, what I also see is that not only in offenders, but even victims who we see as a victim today, and then tomorrow they're an offender.
Absolutely.
Is those using substances to cope with whatever is going on. And so,
And I'm so glad that you bring that up, because often those things are so intertwined. So there might be some trauma during childhood, you might be victim of a child abuse yourself, or childhood maltreatment in any form, physical, emotional, sexual, or you may witness domestic violence in your own family of origin. You start coping with substance abuse, and then that leads your own victimization or offending behaviors. And often, as police officers, you may also see that whoever is a victim one day might be an offender next day, or at least during my 10 years of police officer, I often dealt with the domestic violence situations that the victim and offender were not always a very clear-cut distinction. Do you guys agree with that, or do you have a different type of experience here in Colorado Springs? Like, in terms of the domestic violence, for example, is it always really clear-cut to you who is a victim or who is an offender, or what are your experiences?
Well, I think domestic violence is kind of a different, it's one of the toughest types of crime to make that determination, right? Because you have a primary aggressor that you have to take into, you have to determine who the primary aggressor is, and that is oftentimes really difficult to do. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that our police officers on the street face every day, is determining a primary aggressor, because who knows. And when we look at other types of crimes, our financial crimes folks aren't represented here. but financial crimes and our property detectives, like he was talking about, we see so many times those guys are offending, and they learn, right? They learn those crimes of opportunity, and some of them are taking the opportunity just so they can get that next sale for the drug money, or that we see some tremendously sophisticated investigations through our property crimes where we're talking about, millions of dollars eventually going through, businesses here in town just solely to sell items to manage drug purchases. So I think we're seeing everything. It's very difficult to determine necessarily on domestics, but I think other ones other types of crimes we're starting to see or have been seeing that the drug nexus for it is extremely strong. Can be a strong predictor for other types of crimes.
It strikes everywhere too, it's just the upper socioeconomic people hide it better.
Absolutely, and that is very true. So how do you, as a police force, how do you deal with the different social classes and the drug problem? Like, what is the different type of enforcements that is it still mainly just on the streets, or do you cooperate with the federal law enforcement to try to go after the bigger, or different class of citizens, or is it like, what is the targeted population like? Here in Colorado Springs, for example, like, well, in terms of trying to make any kind of impact in the crime and reduction of crime that is directly related to the narcotics and drugs and so forth, what has been traditionally Colorado Springs BD's approach to the...
All the above, really.
I think for a long time we've been really reactionary, and a lot of that has to do with our staffing levels. And that's an unfortunate part because there's a lot of data that shows that being proactive and targeting certain areas can help a lot. So more recently our department is really trying to switch that direction and creating more of those, you used a good word, impact teams, which are officers that aren't out there just to shag calls that dispatch sends them. They pretty much, unless it's that highest threat to life, they're out there doing proactive work and just making stops and trying to impact behavior that way instead of just reacting to the calls that come through the communication center.
I'll piggyback on that. We have 10 dogs that are trained to detect illegal narcotics. You can legally run a dog by any legally stopped car in the state of Colorado. If that dog alerts, you have probable cause to go in and search that car, right? So think about how many traffic stops are done per day. If we can run a dog by every one of those stops, the dog alerts, we search, we're going to find a lot of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't have the manpower to do that. Even with 10 dogs to do that with as many traffic stops as there is, it just doesn't happen. The resources aren't there for us to support the type of drug enforcement that we need. Lieutenant Vasquez over here worked at the Drug Enforcement Agency, and he saw large quantities come and go. We see that on a regular basis. We partner with the federal agencies, we partner with El Paso County, other drug task force. It's just, there's a lot more demand than there is law enforcement out there.
So if let's just assume that 75% of the crime is directly related to the drugs, and if we could get, we're never obviously going to stop everybody using, right? That's unrealistic. But let's just say that we could get people to reduce somehow, then the crime would go down too. What would be, either in your personal or professional opinion, whatever, what would be the right way of approaching this so we could get the crime to go down? Is it, is it just making more stops? Is it more manpower, or is it more of taking a social approach to it, treating the addiction like?
It's kind of a complex answer, but it's kind of all of the above. In that, especially in seeing with Colorado, now we've got a state statute that allows personal possession of marijuana up to a certain amount. That's one of the reasons, and other states have experienced this as well. That's why they're having such an influx of heroin into the state, is that because the drug cartels, primarily from Mexico and other countries, because they can't really sell marijuana here and make a profit, they're gonna push another drug that they have control over so that they can bump their profits up. So it's more of a supply and demand issue from them. So if we take care of the supply, then the other part of the question is, okay, well, what happens to the demand? And that's more of a cultural, I think, issue than more just a law enforcement issue. You know, there's obviously a part of it in that we're, you know, supposed to arrest the bad guys and go after the people who are possessing it, the people who are selling it, and things like that. And I can tell you from experience in the interviews that I've done and watched other people do is we always try to take it to the next level. We're not just satisfied with, you know, okay, I got my half gram of meth off this guy, I'm just gonna take him to jail now. You know, doing good police work is asking those questions. Where did you get it from? Who's your guy? If you call him right now, can I get some more? You know, that sort of thing. And so it's always trying to take it to the next level so that we can start going after the upper echelon of the supply. But again, that's only from an enforcement perspective. It doesn't necessarily take care of the demand. And so it goes beyond law enforcement and our capacity to deal with that. And to some extent, we can. We can do drug education programs. We can do, you know, we can do certain things on the street with helping people try to get it back on their feet at the street level. But then it becomes, okay, you know, at what point it goes beyond just a criminal mindset and it becomes more of an addictive mindset. You know, at what point did this guy become an addict? Was it something that was actually more of a legal issue? Or is this a family issue, or, you know, a work issue, or a depression issue, or whatever the, you know, 15 or 30, however many reasons you can think of that someone turns to drugs. Again, it's more of a supply problem, and it's not something necessarily that we as law enforcement are really kind of geared to deal with. We can deal with it to a small extent, but it's really not our primary responsibility.
Maybe that's why we need such interaction between different agencies and also at a societal level, so that we are not fractionally, all the different agencies are just fractionally dealing with one single problem, right? Joel, did you have
Well, I was just gonna say, all these guys are gonna roll their eyes at me when I say this, but, so that standard thing, like if I was chief, right? And it's interesting to me because we have cops in every single high school, but by the time the kid's in high school, it's too late to try to warn them about the dangers of drugs. So, in my view, like there should be cops in every elementary school, and I get the manpower issues, I'm just talking,
in a perfect world?
Right, there'd be cops in every elementary school to help provide that guidance, to help people will get a human reaction with the police then. The Hillside Community Center, Deerfield Hills Community Center, there'd be cops assigned to that. And then bringing back, like the police athletic league, where cops get people involved in sports, get these kids involved in sports. And when kids are active and they're involved in sports and they have all these activities going on, cops are being role models for those kids. And then there's no idle time where they would be getting into trouble. And in the elementary school, if you're talking about the dangers of drug use and all that from a very, very early age, like my kids have been hearing it since they were 1, right? If they hear about it from an early age and it's constant and it's consistent, then hopefully by the time they have to make that decision, come high school or junior high or whatever, they'll make the right decision. And it's funny because, you know, we talk about, you know, if I'm running a karate shop, it's my business advantage to say, hey, stranger danger, you need to be worried about being attacked and all that. When actually, I used to talk to those karate people saying, you know what, the chances of one of those kids being taken like that in an abduction, they have a better chance of winning the Powerball or getting struck by lightning. But every single one of those kids, 100% of those kids is going to be offered a drug, or they're going to be tempted. You know, we've all been there. You're at a party. Hey, you want to try this? You want to do this? And it's that moment that kid has to make a decision about what they're going to do. And if they have that background to where they can say no and say no effectively, and it comes from all those positive interactions that were developed from elementary school on, because we can't arrest our way out of the problem. So you have to try to, and so that I'd never get elected as a politician because that's not tough on crime. Does that make sense? But it's, but you're stopping the causations, hopefully. Not all, not 100%, but hopefully. But that would never fly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about the enforcement side of this all day long, really. We could talk about how much stuff the cartels are bringing in. We could talk about the business sense. These guys have an incredible business sense. Their business plan, it rivals any large-scale corporation that you know about. I could talk to you about every aspect of a business that Walmart has that these large-scale cartels think about. And one of the things that they do think about, for example, is when we several years ago saw the first high school that we knew about was Air Academy, heroin in Air Academy. That was a very thought-out business approach because these Mexican cartels understand that that's an untapped area that they can make money off of. But the enforcement part of it, law enforcement in and of itself, we're tapped out. I mean, we can only do so much, and we can partner with the Mexican government, we can partner with DEA, and all of these other agencies, and we do that. CSPD itself has task force officers tasked out to ATF and FBI and DEA, and pretty much every organization in the city. But kind of what Joel was saying, the other two tiers or the other two legs are prevention and treatment. And historically, prevention and treatment have been almost at odds with law enforcement. And the treatment side of it is still that kind of group that's at odds, right? You have somebody that's already a drug addict, how much money can we throw at that treatment, and what are the chances that somebody being treated is actually not going to fall back into the lifestyle. But prevention, it seems to me, that is an area that we are not, in my opinion, throwing enough effort into, and at the youngest age possible, whether that be even really in elementary school, if that's what the experts might think. I don't think we're throwing enough effort into the prevention side of it at the youngest age before it's too late.
I was just going to add something that I see from my perspective is the legal system also playing a huge role in it and being at odds kind of with law enforcement too. I mean, we have to work with them obviously, but some of the laws, first of all, tie officers' hands about what they can do. They're very limited a lot of times with the laws that they're trying to enforce. And then in addition to that, you get the legal system in where there's not really much of a deterrence when somebody is, the case gets dismissed or they are convicted, or they plead, but the penalties are so low that there's not really a huge deterrence sometimes.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up too. We have seen some cases go both ways, wherever the laws are, either to give the law enforcement officers hands tied or go sometimes other way too, where it seems that the criminal justice system does not administer the laws very objectively or fairly, where, you can get, penalties, seemingly petty crimes for like drug possession, for you go to jail for 20 years if it's crack cocaine, and then you can go for maybe raping a child for 5 years or something. It just seems not always very fair, and officers and investigators and civilian employees are working very hard for certain cases, and then it can be very frustrating when those cases either plead out or get dismissed and don't go anywhere and so forth. And so yeah, absolutely. So kind of swifting gears here a little bit. We are talking about currently a biosocial criminology, which is very up and coming theory in criminology, and it's very often very misunderstood criminological theory. Very often people, when they hear a word biosocial criminology, they think that biosocial criminologists advocate that there's just this one gene that causes crime, and that there's going to be a couple different genes that are like a criminogenic crime genes, where in fact a biosocial criminologist just simply believes that there are certain characteristic traits that may make person more vulnerable to the criminal or antisocial behavior, the way that our society defines antisocial behavior, such as low self-control, impulsivity, aggression, maybe having a lower verbal skills or cognitive executive skills or ways of not being able to explain yourself in a conflict situation through verbal means. Instead you resort to the aggressive or physical means and so forth. So these kind of characteristic traits may have genetic backgrounds, right? And not versus just having a one single gene, there are multiple genes that you inherit, just like any other characteristic traits. Whether you're a talented singer or you're good at sports or whatever. Just like all of our characteristics, they have some kind of biological underpinnings. But however, just as much as they have biological underpinnings, they can be greatly affected or impacted by the environment that you grow up. So it's a very, very intricate interplay between your genetic predispositions and your environmental, or your environment that you grow up. So what biosocial criminologists are basically saying that you may be predisposed to the certain kind of characteristics or characteristic traits, such as low self-control or hypersensitivity or impulsivity or aggression, and if and only if you grow up in a criminogenic environment, such as you are abused during your childhood, or you grow up in a poor inner city neighborhoods with lots of gang activity and with the ineffective parents who may be in jail or are prostituting or drug users and so forth, and you have these double whammies against you basically, then you have a higher risk of becoming antisocial or having antisocial behaviors. And these would typically be, according to biosocial criminologists, the chronic offenders that police officers encounter over and over and over again. Do you feel that that might be a case? And if so, do you have examples of, and again, this does not apply to all kinds of criminals, like sex offenders might be completely their own gas, right? Or own group of individuals, but overall, do you have these type of chronic offenders that you have come in contact over and over again, for example, when you have been in patrol, and if so, what would be kind of the typical characteristic traits of that type of offender, if you have?
I think what I think is that they're just like born into a criminal family, if that makes sense, where like those conditions that you described. So, you can raise your child to do quote unquote the right thing, or you raise them to commit crime. And I think some of the families, like I can name off streets and it'll start nodding their head, to where those families, they're raising their kids to be part of that criminal syndicate, part of that criminal enterprise. And yes, they're in an impoverished neighborhood, and yes, the schools may not be the best, and they don't have opportunities that every other person does, but some of that, what you're saying is that they're raised into that family. One particular family, I arrested the 10-year-old twin brothers for pistol whipping an 18-year-old. So 10-year-olds are pistol whipping an 8-year-old. And so, and then they haven't grown up to be productive citizens from there.
Not very surprised.
So, but if that makes sense, that's just what's expected of them.
Well, I'll share an example of the opposite. And I was a school resource officer at both Sierra and Harrison, and there was a group of kids, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Gangster Disciples, bunch of freshmen and sophomores claiming to be Gangster Disciples, going around wreaking havoc in the schools and the neighborhoods. Matter of fact, I think you were the commander of St. Creek at the time. They're supposed to have weapons, a lot of fights, tagging places. This particular kid was walking out, he was the ringleader. He was walking out of the school one time, he was supposed to have a weapon. I confront him. Him and I get in a wrestling match. I find a big old wrench that he was trying to dig for in his bag. I thought at that time, if he would have got that wrench, he would have hit me. Got him in handcuffs. I arrest him. And then it was about a couple months ago, this is about 10 years ago. A couple months ago, I see him. And he actually thanked me for that arrest, because that set him apart. He was low socioeconomic, single, his mom raised him. everything that was against him. But yet, now he's a productive member of society. I think he got a bachelor's degree from UCCS. So, I mean, if you go with that theory, then, you know what, let's just lock everybody up who comes from that neighborhood.
Oh, and that theory would never advocate locking everybody up.
Right.
But
So, what I'm trying to say is that everybody has their free will.
absolutely.
And it comes a lot to impulse,
Right, right.
which it's going to
That's
tie
exactly
everything
what the
else.
theory is saying, that some people don't have the same kind of impulse control. So what sets certain people apart? So what do you think might have been a turning point for that particular individual that was able to set him to the different trajectory in life versus somebody else?
Well, according to him, it was a criminal justice system. The juvenile criminal justice system did him right. Now, I can't say that for every juvenile we arrest,
Right.
but for that particular
For
young
him
man,
it was.
it was very successful for him.
That's
And
right.
there's a lot of restorative justice nowadays, and, it's not just, lock them up or do community service.
So that may right there may make a difference.
Yeah, when I was working with offenders, I think that the most effective thing that we could have done is, and here, this is in prison, in medium security prison already, but was just challenging their value system. And so they grow up with certain values, just like what you were saying in this theory. I mean, you see psychopathy. There are people who have psychopathic traits, but they're not expressed because they grew up in a home where there was loving, secure, stable families, right? Maybe they still have those traits, but maybe they're the CEOs of companies instead of serial killers.
Right.
So in that theory, we would challenge their belief system, their values, by showing people respect, by showing people how to deal with conflict without violence, and that goes with especially verbal violence. Even now, working with victims of crime, a lot of their life surrounds violence. I mean, they grew up in violence, now they're in violent situations, and so again, it's just through our actions and in the way we treat other people, they're learning, I don't have to manipulate a situation to get what I want. I can be clear, I can be honest with my intentions, and then also learning how to cope. So that's pretty complex.
Yeah, definitely. What we have come to understand during this semester is that there is definitely no black and white answer, and it's, it's going to take a while before we will find any kind of satisfactory answer to these questions. So I'm going to ask you some student questions that they have sent me, and these are not as much about the theory, so we'll hopefully get to hear from some of the more quiet members of our panel now as well. So I'm going to start actually from that end, and we can work our way through. So first I have some career-related questions, and then just some questions, general questions about policing, and then some questions about the criminals that you have encountered. So what made you decide to work in this industry? So in whatever your industry is, so criminal in police department, but specifically what your field is within the police department. So start with the dispatch supervisor.
Again, like I said, I kind of fell into it. Obviously, I had some interest in it somewhere because all of my concentrated classes in college were in criminology. I studied a little bit of the law too, so I was fascinated by that side, but I wasn't to the point that I wanted to go through 8 years of law school and put that much work into it. So I kind of fell into it because a friend worked in the field, and it was kind of the best thing that ever happened to me because you just find a passion for it. One of the things I tell new people coming in is nobody's ever really considered this a career position, and that's what I'm trying to change the perspective of that, because it really is, and that's what we find and why we have such a high turnover rate. Is a lot of people come in going, well, I want to get into law enforcement, this is my way to start in, or I just need a job, I need to get paid while I'm figuring out what I want to do for the rest of my life. And if you truly don't have the passion for being a servant, as we all do, you don't come into this career thinking I'm going to, strike it rich and make a lot of money and have great hours and all kinds of days off. You don't. You work hard and you bust your tail. But you do it because, as somebody else said, it's kind of cheesy, but you truly make a difference in people's lives. And some of our call takers and dispatchers have done that. They're the unsung heroes on the other side. And I truly just found myself drawn to it, otherwise I wouldn't have stayed in it as long as I have.
Like I said earlier, I was born and raised here, so I liked working in the community. I never really wanted to work indoors. I was athletic. I didn't like doing the mundane things, the same thing day after day. So I applied for the police department. I do have background of law enforcement with my father and my grandfather. They were federal. I kind of wanted to go federal, but once I got back to Colorado, I kind of wanted to stay here. So I applied for the local police department. I thought I'd just give it a try. Once I kind of got into it, it was fun. I wasn't doing the same thing every day. I never knew what I was going to get from day to day. I would get the stupid little noise complaint calls, and then I would get something like a robbery. And it was just your adrenaline would be going high to low, high to low. I mean, Bailey, usually. And this is just in patrol. Yeah, absolutely. And then moving on to the tactical team. We're really busy out there. You don't really know what's going on in your community. You hear what the media puts out there, but stuff is happening on a daily, day-to-day, that you don't even know about. So you change as a police officer. You might say that I'm a little paranoid. Yell at my husband all the time, always about being aware of your surroundings. But look what happened, less than a month ago, we had an active shooter downtown. We always tell people, this can happen, and it does. So.
Sit with your back to the door, do you?
No.
Restaurant.
Never. I'm always schooling my husband. I'm like, okay, somebody came in this front door and they're shooting. Where are you going to go? Yeah, exactly. So you're in a restaurant and somebody comes in that front door. Where's everybody going to run? Probably where they came in at. Where would you run? Yeah. Why would you go to the kitchen? Exactly.
Because there's knives.
You want to bring a knife?
We've been talking about that.
Better than not having anything.
But this is stuff we teach out in the community. We go out and actually teach people about being situationally aware and being prepared for something that could happen and that does.
So SWAT team is a full-time job in Colorado Springs, that's all you do?
Yeah,
SWAT team?
well, we're a full-time team. We're pretty small. We're 13 members. There's 12 officers and 1 sergeant. We're all operational. If we're not training or we don't have any ops, we're also the fugitive unit. So we're going out looking for the felons, the worst of the worst.
Okay.
And then we also are patrol support. So if we're out there looking for bad guys and we hear patrol calling for help or a good call, yeah, we'll hop on those. So.
And how many females do you have in your team? Just you! Wow, that is amazing. That is awesome. Okay, so.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So what made you to decide to work in this industry? So for
Okay.
police department, and then also now you are the internal investigator, or the head of the internal investigations, right? Oh, were you forced into that position?
Well, it's ironic because when I was in high school trying to figure out what I wanted to do, like Teresa said, I didn't want to be cooped up in an office. I wanted to be outdoors. I wanted to be talking to people. I wanted to be making a difference in people's lives. And I say it's ironic because now I'm in an office. I'm not outdoors. I rarely talk to people, but I do make a difference.
None of us will talk to
And then why IA? That's complicated. That's complicated. But I'll say this: I spent 9 years on midnights, and I had 2 young kids. 9 years on midnights, and when you're a sergeant on patrol, like you get 3 months of weekends out of the year, and then trying to have those weekends full, doing stuff with the family, it got real tough. And so I finally had to make a decision. You know what? I want to be home at night. I want to be home on the weekends. And an IA opening popped up, and then I went there because I'm home at night and I'm home on the weekends. That being said, obviously, post-Ferguson, everything that's been going on in law enforcement, it's turned into a very, very critical, stressful job. But I love it. I kind of look at it now as like I'm the palace guard, if that makes sense, to help keep the department right. Because I think we all all of us sitting up here for sure, like our extended family really is the police department. And when you're around something that much, you start to love it. And then when someone's attacked or like someone from within impugns your name, you start to take that stuff pretty personal. So now I really do love it. And as a side note, this is why we die 5 years after we retire. Because I'll go into a restaurant, I'll sit with my back to the door, because you got to get out of that mindset. And she and I could argue about this all day long, but it's just a difference in philosophy, if that makes sense. Because if you're a cop 24/7, man, that's a hard life.
So I have a really big passion for forensic science. When I was in high school, I had 2 friends murdered and I had one committed suicide. So my logic was investigations is a puzzle and you have to put a whole bunch of pieces together to actually complete that puzzle. And I helped put those puzzles together. So I saw what it did to families, I saw what it did to friends, and it's heartbreaking. So I have the mindset of I'm helping put some closure to a family and helping them as best as I can. Kind of like what the dispatcher said, that it is not really a glamorous job. You are dealing with dead bodies on a daily basis. You go to autopsies, you see a lot of horrifying things. I have a 1-year-old baby, so being on call and constantly having that mindset of work is difficult. But if you have that passion and you really love your job, you'll go as far as you can go.
And you graduated from our program with Bachelor's in Criminal Justice with Forensic Options?
Yes, I sure did.
See guys, that's amazing, awesome.
I actually, when I got my internship for the DA's office, I worked for them for 2 years, and they helped me tremendously to get into law enforcement. So I am very big into being in internships. I applied to be a crime scene investigator 3 times before I actually even got an interview.
So don't give up, guys, don't give up. Awesome. Go ahead.
So my reasons were primarily selfish reasons. I wanted a job that I would love to go to, a job that I would find challenging, something that would change every day. I wouldn't be doing the same thing or seeing the same thing every day. And then once I got that job, it became a lot bigger. It became contributing to the community that I live in and being able to be part of something a little bigger than just me and my everyday work. So that's kind of how I ended up.
Kind of like some of these other guys, my backstory is a little complicated with how I ended up here, but you know, kind of like I said earlier, you know, I started doing EMS in college and was already going to school for criminal justice. I kind of had an idea that's what I wanted to do, but everyone in my family for 3 generations were all professional musicians. Yeah, musicians.
Oh, okay.
They're all, I mean, my dad's a French horn player, my grandfather was an opera singer, my grandmother was an opera singer, my sister's an opera singer, my mom's a professional flute player. My grandfather's a percussionist.
Do you sing?
What's that?
Do you sing?
Not right now. But the big takeaway from it was that there was no real, I mean, the being a teacher and being a musician was the family business. So I had like 0 reference point for this stuff. But I'd seen Worthwhile at the time, and you know, I had seen all the movies, and I was impressionable and 21 years old, and I wanted to do something fun. So now my parents think I have thrill issues. But you know, I can probably speak for a lot of people up here in that once you actually get involved in law enforcement, even you know from a civilian side or from a support role, it becomes much more about your initial reasons. It becomes much more about the people that you work with. You know, it's already been said that you know your law enforcement family is your extended family, and that more than anything really starts kind of motivating you, particularly in your formative years, your early law enforcement career, first like 3 or 4 years or something like that. You get those core people that you really kind of attach yourself to and seem to follow through the rest of your career. Even you know in your personal life, going out and grabbing a beer or whatever. In terms of the EOD stuff, it kind of started in 2007. Actually, Sergeant Arsenault was my mentor when I was in the training academy. So he was like one of the first people in the department I met, and that was right when he was starting to get involved in the EOD stuff. So it's mostly his fault. But then what solidified it for me actually was in 2007 I lost my brother-in-law. He was deployed in Iraq and was blown up by an IED. And so Became kind of more of a personal thing for me at that point. I knew I had a certain skill set that could be applicable to this field. Kind of like I said, I kind of geek out on stuff very, very easily. You know, so the chemistry, the physics, you get to actually flex a lot more of your brain muscle doing this job in particular than you do in other aspects of law enforcement. You know, but I mean, one person doesn't want to go to work every day, blow stuff up, play with robots, you know, work with your hands on a daily basis, and go after the absolute worst of the worst people, because we're responsible for investigating the explosives incidents and terrorist incidents here in the Springs. So that is like, I mean, if you have any motivation to be good at your job, one is coming home every day, not in pieces, and then two is catching the absolute worst of the worst people. So that's, I mean, I don't know what other reason you need to be able to get up and go to work for that, so.
Well, I think Chris and some of the others have hit on it. A lot of it comes down to job satisfaction, and I'll tell all you guys that are thinking about getting into law enforcement or something like that, don't do it for the money. I didn't get in for the money, nobody up here did, because we can make a lot more money doing other things. One of our young guys on the team now was a computer programmer before, very, very intelligent guy, hated sitting in front of a computer. But he's a great cop, he's not doing it because of the money, but he does it because he gets up every work and he enjoys, he gets to do what he wants to do every day. And that's really kind of why I got into it. Again, I was kind of flitting around in college, just about finished my degree in biological sciences. Couldn't stand the tree huggers or whatever at the time, driving me nuts. And I thought, well, I got to find something that I want to do and be around people that I enjoy and find something that I can give back to society and I can feel good about my contribution, not just to my family, but to the society that I live in. You know, our community, I grew up in Cripple Creek as well, so I'm kind of a local, but then the nation too. And I found that in law enforcement, and especially with our department being a somewhat larger department, you really do have a lot of different opportunities to do things. You know, God bless our guys that do the computer forensics, sex crimes, things like that. I couldn't do it. It would drive me nuts. But I'm not pigeonholed into just one specific task on our department. With our department, you kind of get to do a range of a whole different group of things, and utilize a bunch of different skill sets depending on what you want to do and what you feel good about doing. And that was one of the reasons I kind of got into it. I gravitated to the EOD thing. It was kind of by accident. When I was on tactical, we started up an explosive breaching program, and I believe I can blame this guy here at the end of the table. And they came to us and they said, "Hey, we want a bomb tech on the tactical team." I said, "Well, good luck with that." I said, "No, we're talking about you." So I was kind of held hostage and went down to bomb tech school. Found out it was great. Like Chris said, you know, you really get to use your mind. I was able to apply a lot of the physics and chemistry and everything else that I learned. We do all of our WMD stuff too, as far as chem bioweapons, things like that. So my biology background that I never thought would come into play has actually come into play with my job. And then our unit as well, we investigate arsons and we run explosive canines too. So aside from just doing some of the stuff with the explosives and everything else, I've gotten to dabble a little bit in the canine world. Get to hang out with firefighters. Everybody loves firefighters, right? Just ask them; they'll tell you. But we get to do a lot of different things, and that's really just been part of the job satisfaction why I stayed in as long as I have.
I think I just by chance fell into the most perfect job in the entire world for me. I'm about exactly 50% creative and 50% analytical, and I get to do both of those things every single day. I don't think there's any real exact training that you can give somebody to prepare them to be an evidence technician. It is not a glamorous job by any stretch of the It's not even as glamorous as her saying her job is not glamorous. It's less glamorous than that. But I think it's extremely important. We handle all of the evidence that these guys bring in on their calls and their cases, and we have to keep it safe and potentially return it back to owners at the end. And nobody can prepare you for what is the proper way to store bed sheets that may have bed bugs and also DNA on them, or what is the best way to store a chocolate cake with razor blades in it. Nobody can teach you that or prepare you for that. You have to be half of a problem solver, half of a kind of a creative mind, and then half analytical, because I have to analyze the new laws that come out about DNA and all this new digital evidence and stuff like that. So I get to do both things. There's no way that everybody in here will ever be, have the right skill set or the desire to be a police officer. So just know that there are other roles in law enforcement. As a civilian, I found my perfect one, and there's lots of other civilian jobs within the police department. So there's lots of things that you can do in law enforcement without having to go be big and tough and risk your life every day and wear all this stuff that they wear.
Yeah, we usually don't get shot at.
I work in a basement. It's very safe.
I grew up, my dad was a state trooper, so that's kind of how I kind of grew up in law enforcement, influenced by him. When I finally did get into law enforcement, one of the reasons I left the feds is the particular position that I was in it wasn't really investigative in nature, and I always had gravitated toward complex investigations. As soon as I got on with CSPD and tested for narcotics, I was always trying to build my investigations up as big as I could get them, and found that I had success in thinking that way. So I always wanted bigger investigations, and then I ended up going to DEA, and some of our cases, Colorado Springs or El Paso County is actually a large hub for narcotics, not necessarily staying here, but being brought here and then shipped out to other parts of the country. So we were able to work these tremendously large cases. The cases we worked touched, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, South America, Mexico, of course. I mean, and just how do you build these tremendously large cases? That's what I gravitated toward. And then when I promoted to lieutenant, I had the opportunity to come to violent crimes, and as I'm sure you've heard, it's for me one of the most satisfying things I've ever done. Probably the most satisfying. Working homicides, it really doesn't get more complex than homicides. Robberies, the stuff that you get to talk about, that you were part of, and how you help people. Is a common theme here. And one of the other things I'll say about Colorado Springs in particular is that even though we're not really that large of a town from a population perspective, nationally we really are. And I can never remember the number, but we're somewhere around like the 60th or 64th largest department. What is it?
43rd.
43rd. Well, but the largest department. I think we're like the 64th or something largest department in the nation. When you think about that, everybody represented up here is a fraction of what you can specialize in with CSPD, and that's one of the things that drew me to CSPD, is that I can jump from the local narcotics to DEA to homicide, and everybody up here has their stories about, I wanted to do this and I wanted to try that. And every few years you can try something new, and you can become expert in something else with these larger organizations. So CSPD is, without saying like a recruiting poster, CSPD is a fantastic place to work.
It's hard to follow. I never ever saw myself in law enforcement. I was always in the mental health field, and I get joked on a lot because I'm a very huge liberal sometimes, but my thinking is definitely adjusted. But I have always, and probably many of you here have just a really strong drive to help people. And I know it's like a general thing, so you think, well, how can I help people? And I always found that I had a good niche in helping people during difficult times. And so in mental health, it was years later when we're talking about things that have happened in the past. And then, but in this job, I get to help people right after something occurs. My team and I, we're on call, we go out, so as soon as a bank robbery happens, a homicide happens, a sexual assault happens, a domestic violence, we are out there, we are at the hospital, we're on scene, we are just there providing that crisis intervention. And I really enjoy being able to just, even if it's clothing people, feeding people, housing people, just helping with immediate needs, I feel that that's very rewarding. So that's kind of what keeps me at it. It's tough sometimes, dealing with crisis a lot, dealing with a lot of, you see how horrible people can be to other people. And at the same time, you're kind of like that light that is in the person's,
all this horrible thing happened, but there's that helping hand that's helping them through this little portion of it, so I enjoy that.
Well, when I was in college, I wanted to be a teacher. And then as I evolved, I wanted to do juvenile probation. And I always said I did not want to be a cop. I just did not want to be a cop. Did an internship with the police department, did not want to be a cop. Growing up, I wasn't a bad kid, but I wasn't necessarily a good kid. I've been in the back of a police car in handcuffs before in high school, you know, so I didn't want to go down that road. So getting out of college, I'm thinking, I got my degree, you know, I'm gonna go work juvenile probation, right? They're gonna hire me right away. I got my degree. Let's do this. Nope. I sat in my parents' house for 3 months going, man, why won't anybody hire me, you know? So I applied for a Department of Corrections, and for a year, I drove up to Denver. There's a prison in Denver that diagnoses people before they go out to the prisons. So I worked there, and it felt like I was in prison. I would go every day, you get those doors slammed, and they're the heavy doors, they'd slam behind you, and you were locked in there for 8 hours, right? So I hated that. Well, I worked with retired police officers, and I'd hear stories about, this was great, this was that, and I'm like, maybe that might be for me. So I applied for 3 different departments, and I got hired on Lakewood Police Department. Within a matter of a month, I was hired, and we were starting the academy. Where Colorado Springs at the time takes a little bit longer, and that was I still say it takes too long for us, but there's a lot of background checks that go through that. So as I get in Lakewood, man, it was everything that I wanted in a job. It really was. It was excitement, you used your brain, you're compassionate, and you do help people. And so my choice to come down to Colorado Springs is because it's such a huge department. There's so many different things to do. You know, everybody that's on this panel, I wanted to do every one of their jobs at one point, you know? Yeah. So coming down to Colorado Springs, it just opened up so many doors. And even some positions that I went to, I didn't want to be an SRO. Who wants to work in a high school, right? Yeah, you don't want to do that. But it was actually one of the greatest jobs. I got to help a lot of kids. I did investigation. I did a couple attempted homicide investigations as a school resource officer. It was pretty interesting. I promoted out of that. And matter of fact, when I promoted, it was, hey, I'm going to take the test to see what the test is about. You know, I'm not ready to promote just yet, but I'm going to take this test because 4 or 5 years from now, I want to be a sergeant. Well, I don't do anything just a little bit. You know, you got to go all out. If you're going to do it, go all out, right? So I did that, got promoted, and same thing with K-9. When I applied for K-9, there was 4 other sergeants that were more senior to me, had more experience, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to become the sergeant of K-9. No way. But I'm going to make it a hard decision for whoever's making that decision. So I gave it all out. And, you know, I was lucky. I'll be the first to say I was lucky. You know, growing up, going down the wrong path, and making the right decisions, and just falling in the right place. Sometimes I was lucky. But I'll tell you what, in almost 17 years of law enforcement, there's not a day that I haven't dreaded going to work. Every day I'm driving to work or I'm going to the station. Man, I love it. I do. And it's just it's crappy as this job's been sometimes, you know, gave mouth to mouth to an 18-month-old who didn't make it, you know, that weighs on you forever, right? But every day I still enjoy going to work.
Nothing for me to say. You heard it. You heard it from the experts there. I came from a little different era because I'm a lot older. I graduated from high school and I got a draft card to go to Vietnam. And it's not that I didn't want to go to Vietnam, it's just I had an opportunity to go to college with a sports scholarship. Lack of talent kept me from that dream. So I'd always wanted to be a police officer. I always knew that I wanted to be a police officer. The only person in my family was my grandfather, who was a police officer in a small town during the Depression. They couldn't afford to give him a gun. So they gave him pretty much he had to communicate his way out of problems. And he was related to half the people there. And still had to communicate his way out of problems. And had a tremendous amount of respect for him. He was a great man. And I don't think that's what necessarily drove me to that. But to make a long story short, I went to school. I was actually on the Boulder campus in the 70s, and there was a little unrest, kind of like it is now. And I saw a lot of disrespect for servicemen coming out of Vietnam. It really hacked me off. Because I'd be with some friends, and just because they were in a uniform, you know, they would throw stuff at you and yell at you, baby killer and all that kind of stuff. It's a different time, and I know some of you are in the military right now, and you haven't experienced that. But it drove me more to public service. I wanted to be part of that. So I finished and got hired on the Springs Police Department and did a lot of jobs that have been talked about there. I was very fortunate. I was able to do just a whole very varied amount of work in 34 years and never had to leave the ranch, so to speak. Never had to pick up like a federal agency and move my family from Washington and do a stint here or whatever. And I thought about going to the feds. You'll do that. You young cops will. About 10 years on, cops, don't you have that epiphany? Am I going to stay at this place, or am I going to go do X? Then you have kind of the, yeah, I'm going to do this. So, but the real reason is the people. And it's the same kind of people that I see sitting in these seats. And believe me, I was just going to teach a couple of classes when I retired, because I had this vision of a college student, and it wasn't going to be, you know, I'm not going to sit here and debate you about, you know, all these kind of things that you know nothing about, and so I don't know if this teaching is going to be for me. But this school and the students here, you're just really close to sitting on this side of the panel right now. You really are. And so that's kind of why I decided to, after retire, making this a full-time job. So it's great to hear from people that have done that. And, great to hear people that are doing it right now, especially with all the turmoil going on right now. There's a lot of turmoil. That's one thing I'll always respect, is the resiliency of the police field, because we've been crushed on before, and we'll survive it. We'll come back. We're the most highly scrutinized, highly looked at. You know, you talk about internal affairs, you talk about Department of Justice, you talk about everything. And yeah, there are some bad cops out there, but very, very few. Most of them are right here, like you see here. Men and women, right here. They're good people. They're good people. This is what you see. And it doesn't matter if they're on the civilian side or if they're on the officer side. It's that same dedication to service, dedication to their community, dedication to one another that you see out there. And we'll weather that storm. We'll weather that storm. And the reason you weather that storm, quality individuals.
Thank you. And I appreciate really Rod bringing up, you know, in the light of everything that has been going on, you know, and how much scrutiny police has received recently, and that takes it even more of you guys to come here and speak in front of the classroom, in front of all of us, and we really, really appreciate it. And I also think that especially Colorado Springs Police Department just has enormous, you know, respect of the citizens of Colorado Springs and Colorado in general. I think that we all appreciate and respect you all enormously, and I think that you have a reputation of being a very clean and great department who provides wonderful services to its citizens. So we value you very much. None of these things that have happened, you know, have impacted at least my opinion, and I don't think it has impacted anybody else's opinion here in the room. So, but we do appreciate enormously of you being here. So, and that's what I at least always emphasize in my classes, is that there's always going to be a couple bad seeds in every single profession, whether it's a police department or it's academia or whatever, you name it. But it doesn't make the rest of that profession bad. You know, you can't help but have always at least one bad seed in any given profession. You know, but we have to remember that it should not impact our opinions of rest of the people who represent that field. So, thank you again. All right. So, one of our students wants to know, what does Police Academy entail, here specifically in Colorado Springs? So, physically, educationally, and emotionally. So, I'm going to let you guys pick whoever would be the best person to answer this question. Okay.
Well, I think I think the police academy, what people don't realize really is that it's mainly academic. To where you're in a classroom setting like this most of the time, learning city ordinances, state statutes, learning how to be a cop, the nuts and bolts of it. But this job's so complicated that it just doesn't stop there. You have to go out into the field, and you have like 6 months of a field portion where you train. But then you're really not considered knowledgeable or you know enough to like be dangerous until you have like 3 to 5 years on the job, just because it's so complex. But it's mainly academic. There are physical components to it, I wouldn't say it's a military boot camp type setting, and in fact, if anything, trying to move away from that type of model. The State Patrol is really still set on, you know, staying in barracks. You're up in the sunrises, you're doing your PT and all that, you're wearing the uniform, yes or no, sir. The State Patrol is still holding on to that, but as an agency, and it hasn't been just recently, it's been probably over the last 10 years that we've shifted away from that, if that makes sense. Because I'll say this, and it goes along to training, and I think the sergeants up here could agree with me, that when you have an officer on our department, we entrust you to make decisions. We entrust you to make the right decisions. So you're given a lot of latitude, you're given a lot of power, and we want you to make decisions. Where sometimes people come into our organization and they get paralysis, right? They don't want to make a decision, so they come and ask us, and we're like, hey, we hired you to make decisions. So we don't want rigidity. We want someone that can think. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, to me, I guess maybe it's counter to what we're getting painted as lately. Am I wrong, or no? Yes?
I don't know if they have much of an opinion of the
Right.
working process.
Well, I guess the whole, like, we're not Neanderthals, if that makes sense. We're people that can think, and we want you to think when you were out there. Like, when we show up on a scene, we don't want to hear, what do you want me to do, Sarge? We want to hear, hey, I've considered all my options, and this is the route that I plan on taking.
So philosophy is changing a lot, because even back like, I don't remember when I went through the police academy, 2001 in Texas, it was much more authoritarian, you know, where it was kind of, you were taught how to think.
But that's
You were
Texas.
almost trained. So you are trying to change that.
That's Texas. That's a whole other session that we can talk about.
No, it's taxes.
Texas.
Taxes are what you pay. Texas is where you go.
Do I have a Texas accent, by the way? You guys didn't think I was from Texas, did you?
No.
No?
It's not a popular by the way.
I was there for 15 years.
I'm sorry.
All right, so my next question, or student next question was, what does field training consist of? Once you're actually out of academy, well, first of all, how long is your academy? Is it 6 months?
Oh,
It's
man.
26 weeks.
26 weeks.
26 weeks.
So once you're out of academy, how long are you in field training, and what does it consist of? Do you have different phases, or how does that all work?
Yes, it's like, what, 6 months?
No,
At least, or 8 months?
PTO program is, I want to say it's 3 months. It's like 16 weeks. You have, basically you have like a 1 week introductory phase, what we call a ghost phase, where you basically just following, you're assigned to a more senior officer who's in charge of training you. And you have a week of what's called a ghost phase. Basically training, originally it wasn't that way. You were originally basically expected to show up on the first day, and your PTO was just like, all right, Rook, have fun. I'll be in the car if you need me. They just kind of throw you into the fire. Right about the time I started doing training, we started talking a little bit more about it, and basically figuring out that when your first week out of the academy, it is a complete blur. You're basically just figuring out how to not be lost in the police station at that point. So we don't really.
Overwhelming.
Yeah, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. So you have zero, capacity really to think your way through that stuff. It's just so much. And so that's the last thing we want, is you just trying to tick all the check boxes of all the stuff that you've been taught in the academy, and also not get your training officer killed. So there's the first 6 or 7 weeks. The first week is a ghost phase, and you have like another 6 weeks. Then you have a midterm evaluation, which is a week long. You actually switch trainers at that point, because you want an objective review over what your progress is and about where you stand. So usually the guys actually doing like the first week, the actual training phase are the less experienced PTOs than the guys who are actually doing the evaluation phase. Because they've seen a lot of other people coming through the PTO program and already kind of have a litmus test and what they're gonna measure and where you're at. So then after your midterm, they can decide, or yes, she's good to go, or they need a little bit more time. So they need to get extended for another week or two in this initial phase. Then comes your secondary phase. I think it's another 6 or 7 weeks, and you get another PTO, okay, and you go through the same stuff. At this point, you're basically expected to start taking charge. Your PTO in your first phase is going to help you out a little bit. Big part of that is navigation, but then also just, hey, maybe we should take a step back and think about this here for just a second. In the second phase, we do a lot more of what's called failing forward and let you make your own mistakes. And because we can tell you how to do the job all the time, but unless you screw up, you're going to keep on making the same mistakes over and over again because you have that safety net. So once you get out on your own and you're doing all this stuff by yourself, you have no safety net. You're responsible for your own decisions. So by about midterm on, that's kind of where we expect you to be. Is you're making your own calls. If you're really stuck, we're not going to let you, get hurt. We're not going to let you do something illegal. We're not going to let you do something with policy. But we're obviously going to step in and do something. But by then, you've already got, on an average night, you're running between 10 and 15 calls a shift. So you're thinking 4 shifts a week. So, what is that? Help me out. Like 240, 300 calls, something like that. Yeah, right? Right, I told you I was a geek. So, by the time you're done with your PTO phase, you're already bordering on, 600, 700 calls. And you've already started to build some mental templates for a certain type of call. Okay, robbery call, we should do this. I should stay away from this. I remember one time my PTO smacked me upside the head when I said I was going to do this. Maybe I won't do that again. And then again, if you do your final eval as your last week, and your final evaluator will determine, yes, he needs more time, or no, he's good to go. And this is all something that actually all the PTOs on your respective shift in your division will actually get together and have meetings about certain areas that you may be struggling in. If navigation is a problem, well, guess what? We're going to take your cell phone and your GPS away, and you're just going to have to use a map like the rest of us. So you can actually learn your way around rather than have someone tell you how to get somewhere. If you're really struggling with your officer safety stuff, then what we're going to do, we're going to go downtown and we're going to work the bar detail for a few weeks, and we're going to get you good at officer safety, or you're going to get hit in the mouth one way or the other. So it's one of the things where we'll identify certain weaknesses and strengths of different recruits and assign them to different PTOs who have different strengths and weaknesses and things like that. So it's not just a process of you start at point A and end up at point B. It really is something where it's very involved from the trainer, this PTO sergeant, and the chain command all the way down through the individual recruit. So that's kind of how we approach it. And a lot of other departments nationwide have adopted a PTO program that's really similar.
It's really set up for you guys to succeed when you get into our program. Because the department's spent an inordinate amount of money to do your background check. And then guess what? When you're sitting in the academy, you're getting paid.
Yeah.
So that's money out of the department's budget, out of the city's budget. So when we get you into PTO, we want you to succeed. We're not just throwing you to the wolves. So that's kind of how it's set up.
It's like $92,000 is when, isn't that right, Chief?
We're close, yeah. It's probably up now. It used to be about 90.
What's your failure or success rate in terms of who gets out of the PTO program? Because you can have somebody who seems to be a great, right, like in a police academy, but then for whatever reason they don't seem to be able to do the job once they get to the PTO program.
Well, I know, like tomorrow I'm going to one where someone's getting terminated. So it's not too often, but it does happen. Because we also recognize as an agency that if you can't succeed, then you're in a high risk, high liability job. So,
right.
We don't need you around. But interestingly enough, when Chief down there was the chief, it was like 2.2 people we would lose a month, whether it be through attrition, retirements, leaving for another agency, and now we're up to like 4.2 a month.
But the good news is, there's somewhere else to go sometimes when you don't succeed on the sworn side. So we have a few people that work in communications that love law enforcement, always wanted to be cops. but maybe struggled with the hands-on or the actual physical contact and found it wasn't for them, and transitioned over to the civilian side and have made really good careers in there too, as long as it wasn't a disciplinary thing or something like that. It just wasn't the right place on the sworn side.
Good. So, what, once you are actually on your own, do you, in patrol, and this is other misconception that lots of people have, that you can just automatically jump to be a detective or this and that. You pretty much have to start in patrol and get your feet wet and do your time in patrol, right? Once you are in patrol and you're on your own out of the field training program, are you one man, woman units, or do you have a partner in Colorado Springs? And what kind of shifts do you work, and what shift is like most actionable? Like where do you get the most action? Students want to know.
I'll answer that.
Okay.
Well, it just depends. So you get to pick a shift according to your seniority. You're brand new out of the academy, you're probably gonna be working midnights with Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off. That means you can hang out with all your academy mates on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's great. So you're usually working midnights. It's a big change. I know it took me a while to get adjusted to it. I was either sleeping 4 hours or sleeping 14 hours. In addition to that, you have responsibilities of showing up at court. Court's not at nighttime. We don't have night court here. So that's also going to mess up your sleeping schedule. Your family's going to mess that up. You go out on the streets, you're usually in one-man unit or woman unit. But a lot of times you're not getting sent to calls by yourself. Even if it's something small as a noise complaint, you're probably going to be going with another partner. These days it's not getting any better. We're always units short. They're calling for units to clear. So you may get sent to somewhere by yourself. You just need to be able to determine whether you're able to handle that by yourself, or is that going to just put myself in danger, and then somebody's going to have to come and maybe save me now. So you have to be smart as a new officer. Can I handle this myself, or should I wait for that other unit to come? So we always have to stress that to those new officers. I know you want to go in there, run in there and handle things, but is that the safest thing to do? When I was a PTO, I was a trainer out there, I always stress officer safety. That's the number one thing we teach our new recruits is we want you to go home to your family. I know we put ourselves in front of danger to help the citizens, to save the citizens. There's a thing called priority of life. Victims are above us, innocent bystanders. There's us, and then there are people below us, which are those bad guys or suspects. So I'm not going to do anything to benefit that suspects, but I'm going to maybe put myself in front of danger to save one of you guys. So that's something that we stress and we go over and over in the academy for those recruits. So yeah, a lot of times we're out there, we'll be handling calls for service. Just because you were in a 4-month program, you don't know everything out on the streets. You could be a 20-year veteran and still stumble on something that just totally trips you up. I was about 8 years on patrol, but I wanted that time to learn my job and do it well. I liked patrol. A lot of times people go to patrol and they grumble, but I think that's just a point where you learn every part of the department. You learn a little bit of investigations, you learn some tactics. So you get a little piece of everything from patrol, and then I always felt that you could branch off from there. So I definitely learned a lot of patrol, learned a lot from other officers, and took little pieces from what everybody did to kind of determine how I handled my calls for service.
Great. And is the midnights, like during weekends or weekend evenings, basically the busiest time?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't?
Yeah, no.
You could go, there's a lull after 3 a.m. till about 6:30, and then it starts ramping up and it's busy all day. We used to tell people that the day shift was a lot of paper calls, and there's still a lot of that, but that's also when you get your bank robberies, because the banks aren't open at night, so you get that. The midnights, so when the bars close, you get a lot of the fights and those type of disturbance. Domestics happen every hour of the day, 24 hours a day. DUIs, they actually happen all day long too, and you get a lot in the mornings when people have been out all night. And, you know, you used to say the violent crimes were more later at night, but that trend is changing too. I mean, our last two shootings were, 9:30 in the morning on a Saturday? That's supposed to be your downtime and your quiet time. So it's getting harder and harder to predict.
Pinpoint, yeah, exactly. Okay, so then some general questions about policing. There's again, remember these come from students, so I'm gonna honor their questions. One student wants to know, what is your intake on, or your thoughts about female police officers? So,
I love it. Well, actually, they get more of a response, at least in my experience. You know, the officers I worked with, they knew their job, and usually the bad guy, they see a female bowing up to them, and they just kind of think, what does she know that I don't know? Yeah, I've never had an issue with it. You hear that?
Yeah. Well, I guess since I'm the only one here. Well, just from my perspective, I might not do my job the same way as a male officer. I might not let certain things go. I have to have a presence there because I might be smaller. I know guys are faster, stronger, maybe bigger than me. I'll admit it. I see it in athletics and sports all the time. So I might have to do my job slightly different than a male does it. But I can still do the job. I have to work harder at things to be able to get to maybe that level. Like in the, to get on the SWAT team, I had to do the same tests as the guys. I didn't expect them to lower those limits for me because I knew I had to do the same job. And I had to be able to keep up with them. Part of the job is like pull-ups with a 40-pound vest. It's tough. It took me a while to be able to get to it, and now it's really not that hard. So sometimes it's just working that much
most of
harder.
the guys won't be able to do what you're able to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that I can do some things that maybe the guys on my team can't do. In addition, I guess maybe being able to go on that personal level, like talking one-on-one with a female, sometimes they go ahead and send me to do that. Sometimes that kind of agitates them too. So it's different. I would say that I'm not one of the guys, especially on the team. I'm like, no, guys, I'm not one of you, but I am a team member. I'm one of the team members. Because I'm not trying to be a guy. I'm trying to be a woman in a predominantly male career field.
Just for the record, we encourage and actively solicit all female people to try to be a cop for sure, because what we find is that females communicate a heck of a lot better than men. And so most of this job is communicating with people. So, is there
Some kind of guy all
a disagreement?
They're trying to argue.
What do you say?
You're what? We definitely encourage that. We definitely want that. And I'll say this, like back when the chief came on, I used to work with a lady that was of his generation, and she's like, Joel, I've been sexually harassed by the best of them. Like she's tough, right? And then today is 2015. You know, it's not an issue that she's on a call with me. I could care less. It's not even a thought in my brain. Whether she's there, she's there. Does that make sense? So like all that, you guys, we're not that big of Neanderthals.
Great, awesome. Okay. So, student wants to know, how many hours per week do you work? Well, I know that it depends on your position as well. And how hard it is to maintain a healthy social life or healthy family life? So we can kind of just go down the line just really quickly.
I'll try and keep it quick. We talk a lot about shift work and the realities of shift work. You have to be able to be flexible. You may not have Christmas on Christmas Day, but if your day off happens to be a couple days before, a couple days after, you still celebrate Christmas as if it were that day. And hopefully, there's there's a joke in the comm center about how many different last names somebody might have because there's a lot of marriages and divorces in law enforcement. You have to communicate really well, and you have to have a supportive partner that can understand shift work and the realities of your job, because you try not to take it home every day, but sometimes you do. So really being flexible and working around it. You know, your kids grow up knowing that you might miss birthdays or miss those holidays, but you can make it work if you are committed to making it work. Some people, it breaks them and they wind up leaving it, but you have to make it a priority in your life. I'm real big on vacations. I tell people that all the time. We do vacation picks for the whole year, and people are like, well, I don't know what I want to do 9 months from now. It doesn't matter. Take a week, pick it, because you get guaranteed at that time, and then figure out what you want to do along the way. But make sure that you take your time and time for yourselves.
For me, we don't have a set amount of hours. Yeah, we work our 40 hours. On our team, we're on call 24/7. So I have to be able to respond to an incident within 30 minutes. So it's a huge commitment for me. I said this is the best job for me, but it has its downsides, and that's the on-call portion. Unless we're on vacation, I can't really go far out of town. I mean, I can go up to Monument, and that's about it. I can't be drinking on my days off, because like I said, I'm on call. So it's a huge commitment.
That's every day.
Unless I'm on vacation. So it's a huge commitment. I don't have kids, but my husband agreed to something like this. This is something we had to sit down, talk about, is this worth it? And he's very supportive about it. So it doesn't just affect you, it affects your whole family. In addition, my husband is not law enforcement. So it's good to have that side outside of the law enforcement. So you're not constantly talking about work and the gripes about work and the good things about work and what happened last night on this call. It's good to just completely get away from that and have your social life and your hobbies outside of the job.
And with me, I work probably 115 to 120 hours every 2 weeks, because I'm in IA in an interesting time right now. So there's a lot of hours, and then my wife works full-time, that whole story. But so to deal with all that and to deal with the work-home life balance, like I don't go drinking with the guys, I don't go to Vegas with the guys. When I'm off, I'm focused on my family, and that's it. Like, I'll go have a breakfast burrito with him every now and again. But other than that, like, I guard my weekends real jealously. And like Teresa says, I don't want to hang around you and listen to more work. Plus, no one wants to hang out with me anymore anyway.
So as a crime scene investigator, we work our 40 hours a week, and then you're usually on call once a week and 1 weekend a month. But like for instance, the Halloween shooting, the active shooting, I was on vacation and I still got called in. I had to go. So being a single mom, it's hard. But if you're really, really passionate about your job and you love going to your job, you will make all the sacrifices in the world, and you just kind of have to hope that your family will support you as best as possible.
For most of us in the lab, we're pretty much on a similar schedule. We have a standard 40-hour week. That being said, we're all specialists for the most part, so if such situations arise that require that knowledge or that work to be done, then we're expected to be available as soon as possible.
So in the bomb squad stuff, first of all, in patrol, you really just kind of work a fairly set schedule. You're not on call. You get your 3 days off, you work your 4 10s. Occasionally you might get held over because you end up getting into a bucket. But I mean, you're probably only going to end up messing like an extra 3 or 4 hours on the end of your shift on a really bad night, especially if you work midnight.
What's a bucket?
It's a bucket of something.
There's
you guys
a bunch
usually-
of paperwork and it's just a big old mess.
Yeah, it's just a huge, it's usually like an identity theft or, something like that where you have a room full of evidence that you have to catalog and document and take pictures. And it's just a bucket of just a big old mess. But anyway, once you start getting into the specialized unit stuff, the requirements for that unit are generally very well understood at that point. When I was in property crimes, for example, we were not on call. We worked our 4 10s. If we had a complicated case, we usually had the opportunity to kind of schedule some follow-up or something like that in advance. So we kind of had the opportunity to let our family know what was coming. When it started getting into EOD stuff, that kind of vanished because we're on call a lot. We also, because we end up responding to arsons and things like that, serious arson cases, you kind of think like how many explosive calls can you actually go to in a year? Well, like 4th of July weekend, I think I turned in something like 85 hours or something like that. So it was literally wake up, go to work, come home, fall asleep, wake up, go to work, come home, fall asleep for a good week or two. It really just kind of varies, and it's kind of just subject to the requirements of the job. And again, if you don't love it, then you're just gonna leave. So it's just something you make peace with very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's important too to remember that you do want, and some of the guys and ladies have already touched on it, you really do want a life outside of police work. Because believe it or not, you can't get jaded doing this job. And if you hang around with a bunch of other cops, all you're doing is talking about cop stuff, and all the public doesn't like us or this or that, you can't become jaded, you can get burned out. So I know I stress for all my guys, and especially with the specialized unit where we may be working 60, 70, 80 hours in a week, I make them take that time off. And the specialized units, you've got guys that want to be there, especially guys that are playing with explosives. But they're probably not wired completely right anyway. They want to do that job. And so I'm at the end of the year now, and I'm at the point where I'm forcing guys, and you've got to take this time off. You will go home, and you will not come into work and turn your phone off and stuff like that. Because everybody is wired to do that job, and they want to do it to the best of their ability, and we love what we do. But, and like I said, because I've been there, you can get to a point where you get burned out if you do that, so you've got to check yourself.
Definitely have hobbies. I think they've all kind of touched on it, that really, I think just about everybody in the police department knows that they are kind of on call at any moment, even civilians, especially if you have a specialized position, like she was saying, or even in the comm center, you can be forced to work overtime. No, you won't go home, you will stay and work. So you go into the job knowing that. I have 2 phones and I keep them with me at all times, and I answer them all the time, and I check emails all the time. But you do have to be cognizant. I love my job so much that I do all of that, but I have to be very cognizant of that and step away from it and spend time with my children, with my family. So it's like anybody who has a job that they love and they're committed to. You gotta just find that balance somehow.
Pretty much the same thing. I think when you have downtime, you take advantage of it. For the violent crimes investigators, if you look at like the Halloween shooting, we had that, and then we had a homicide, and we had the Mountain Shadows officer involved, and then we had Friday night's homicide. So we're working anywhere from 70 to 80 hours a week in the last, since Halloween. But then you have your downtime where you're working those shorter weeks, and you got to definitely take advantage of it. Like Jennifer said, I think hobbies are key, whether it's working out or whatever your hobby is. Make sure you have something, and crocheting, crocheter. I think we all work a lot of hours at times, and then we all have downtime at times. So the victim advocacy unit is, Mario talked about, this is one of the most highly used units in CSPD.
Yeah, our advocates are on call every 4 weeks, and when they are on call, they work upwards of 50 to 70 hours a week. We get called out for every violent crime. I'm going to say every violent crime, but Colorado has a statute, it's called the Victims' Rights Act, and there's certain types of crimes that fall under that, and they're the violent personal type crimes. So we get called out by patrol, by investigative units, all the time, so we're constantly out, and we have a large group of volunteers that also help us, but the actual staff advocates, they work a lot when they're on call.
Social life, pretty much the same, except like Teresa down there, I'm on call 24/7, and you can't go that far. So I've got season tickets to the Broncos. I get rid of a lot of tickets. It's just, Friday night when you're done, it's you can't go out and have a frosty libation. Everybody's DD. So, but you still go out and socialize. When I go on vacation, I go on vacation. Shut off the work phone when I get out of town. Even if I don't get out of town, I tell people I'm out of town. Just, play golf. I've seen this guy at the golf course a couple times, just relax. But you're on the 7th hole, and I gotta go. There you're running through all the golfers, or you're at a movie, gotta go. You know, a couple weeks ago, I just ordered Thai food, you know, and gotta get it paid, get it to go, and we're going. So, you know, there's some, you do make some sacrifices, but I still love this job.
And your families, I guess they just adjust that because they know that that's the life that you have chosen, so they have to. Next three questions I'm going to try to combine because I think that they're all very similar, but students want to know basically, what is the worst call that you have ever responded to? If you can say, some of you may have many that are worst calls. And what is the toughest emotional thing that you have ever dealt with in your job? So kind of combine the toughest emotional thing that you have to deal with the job with the worst call, and also the scariest encounter you have had. So all these kind of try to combine. Sorry, many aspects of the question. I can reread it if you have to. But again, starting down the line there.
So our line of work's a little different. We experience vicarious trauma, but it's all verbal. So you don't have the sights, you don't have the smells, but you have the sounds, and sometimes that can be haunting. So I think some of the scariest things that weigh on a lot of us is being responsible for people's lives. We've been under a lot of scrutiny lately, and you get a lot of comments about, well, I thought all your job was to just pick up the phone, get the address, and send the help. They do so much more than that. You know, they deliver babies, they give CPR instructions, they give bleeding control. They're literally a lifeline for those people. So that weighs heavily while you're doing the job. For me personally, probably the worst calls have to deal with children. And to hear a parent sobbing on the phone because they've come, there's two that haunted me, and one was a 18-month-old that somebody left in the car. They got on autopilot, drove to their job, completely forgot their child was in the back of the car, worked an 8-hour shift on a really hot day, and came out and found their baby. So you can still hear that sound in your head 15 years later. And another was parents that came home and their 14-year-old had shot herself, and to hear them weeping. So those are the worst ones. Because it's all like I said, an auditory thing. You can still hear those sounds. So you have to find that way to compartmentalize. And I don't know, Monty didn't really touch on this, but the victim advocates are called out for the public, but her group does a lot of work for the employees as well. So they're great, and there's a lot of resources in the department to help you deal with those traumas.
For me, I would have to agree. The worst calls are the ones dealing with kids. There was an incident with a mother who set her house on fire and set her kids on fire and slit her kids' throats. That was the worst. I wasn't the first on scene, but I had dealt with the mother, and when her husband was still alive, the husband on domestics prior to that. Husband killed himself, and then months later she felt like she had to take everybody out with her. Some of the kids did survive, thankfully. Kids are resilient, and they can really make it through some horrible, horrible situations. But definitely incidences involving kids and violence are the worst. Scariest, man, on tactical, we deal with the worst of the worst. These people, they always say, you know, they're not going to go back to prison, they're going to kill the cops. So those ones are pretty scary. There was one where the department had been dealing with this one crew. A couple cops had shot previous members when they encountered them. We were looking for one individual, same thing, said he's not going to go down. One of his friends actually called in and said, hey, he's dangerous, he has guns with him, this is where he's staying, come get him. So we basically did, he rammed our vehicle, he tried to run over a cop, pulled out a gun, and thankfully we were able to stop him before he hurt any cops. So I think that was the scariest for me.
I think what I'll do is I'll turn this question up a little bit more, because everyone up here is going to be able to say the same genre of this kind of stuff. And so I don't want to focus on that because it's part of the job. But what I will say is that when you're applying to be a cop, what they do is they look at resiliency. And so when you meet with a psychologist, you run through 3 different tests. And each one of those tests, a huge component of what they're looking at is how resilient are you? How are you able to bounce back from adversity? And those that don't have a high resilience rate, because again, you know, the whole table, if they choose to, is going to be able to say all this, and it really doesn't mean anything. No, what it means is that they're able to bounce back from that kind of stuff. So like, all respect to the person that asked the question, don't focus on that, because that's not so much like she sees more than anybody. I'll tell you that right now. But that's not the day-to-day why we get up and go to work, right? And it's one of those things where think about how resilient am I to respond to that type of stuff. That's all you need to think about.
So let's turn the question then around and see how, when you have encountered, like what has been emotionally, like when you have this emotional trauma from your job, how do you deal with it? How do you bounce back personally from that?
I'll say too, real quick on that, all of us are pretty funny. But that makes sense, it's true. Like,
There's also that
There's
kind of a
there's
top
humor.
black humor that many of the outsiders, well, when I say outsiders, I don't mean outsiders, but people who are not, who don't work for the police department, would not understand or would see it as a cruel, when it really is not intended to be cruel, but it's way to deal with the traumatic situation.
But out of all of us, it's her, I'm telling you right now.
So how do you deal, when you see in the crime scenes, when you probably have seen some already in a short time, it's some pretty bad stuff, how do you bounce back, how do you deal with that?
So my first scene when I got hired on was a baby, and my baby was 4 months old, this baby was 2 months old. So it really hit close to home, and it was a SID, so it could happen to any kid. So this was definitely kind of a hit, because I went to that scene and all I was trying to do was hold back tears. Because it was so hard for me to process the scene, see this innocent little baby dead, and then you have the coroner's office who's allowing the parents back in the scene, and you hear the mom crying, you hear the dad screaming. So I left that scene, I'm not even gonna lie, I lost it. It was so hard. So at that point, when I get a call from Crimes Against Children where I have a baby, I have to sit down and I have to seriously, mentally just let go of everything that I know I'm about to see, because it's gonna be hard either way. And when I first got hired, you're on call 24/7 for 6 months straight. So any calls that come in, you're going. And so you have a death, you have an autopsy. So then I had my first baby autopsy, which was just as bad. So you definitely have to set aside your differences and go to this scene and say, okay, this is a scene, I'm here to do my job, and I'm going to do my job the best that I can, and I'm not going to communicate of this being a little innocent baby and going home to my baby at home. Other than that, like severely decomp bodies, it's disgusting. You know, you got maggots coming out of the mouth, you got popping going on, and some really disgusting smells, but you just have to deal with it the best you can. It's your job. I love my job, and I'm going to investigate the best that I can.
So how do the rest of you deal with it and bounce back from dramatic situations?
I think I'm pretty fortunate in that pretty much anything I have to deal with, none of it's alive anymore, so I don't have that human interaction. So it's very easy for me to just disassociate, and what I'm dealing with is evidence from that perspective and that perspective only. I don't have that degree that Jessa has of human interaction.
I guess for me, I mean, it kind of goes into the same kind of way that you decompress in your time off. You know, for example, I go fishing. I mean, you know, I go into the woods where I have 0 cell phone coverage, so he can't call me, and then I just go fishing for a whole day, and just, you know, I'll take my son with me or whatever, and just to enjoy family time. It really kind of helps you. I mean, you know, I think pretty much everybody up here, anything involving kids is horrible. And it's really hard to let go. Even, you know, adolescent kids or mostly grown kids or something like that. Again, it's the dark humor definitely helps, and that's how you get a lot of camaraderie with the people that you work with. Is you go through really traumatic situations together, and then you kind of cope together, you recover together. You know, I mean, you never know. The guy who pulls you over may have just been doing a dead body call or a dead baby call or something like that. He just has a crap day. I mean, I don't think anybody would just say, hey, I had a red letter day today, you know, or something like that. So, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, sometimes we come across as being a little frosty, we may be a little angry, or disdainful, or cynical, or whatever, just because, we're human beings just like anybody else. But I mean, really, it just boils down to all of us kind of have to find our own coping mechanism. And for me, it's just peace and quiet. So, and fishing, usually together.
I think Chris really hit on it. As you become a cop, you really kind of have to do some self-reflection and realize what you need to do to be able to de-stress. For those of you that have been in the military, you know what I'm talking about. And when you don't have those type of mechanisms in place, that can contribute to PTSD and things like that. For me, a lot of it is like Chris said, just kind of getting away in peace and quiet, being able to turn stuff off, and then having somebody that you can really talk to, whether that's a spouse, a friend, something like that. Maybe in the job, maybe not. But for me, it helps to be able to share and kind of regurgitate and bounce some of that stuff off of somebody else. But regardless of how you are and how you're wired, you need to understand that when you get into this job and know how you're going to react and how you are going to decompress, because you're going to have to at some point.
I kind of have a similar situation as the comm center. We kind of only get one aspect of it, which is the visual. We just see the evidence that comes. And sometimes we know some of the specifics of the case, and sometimes we don't. So sometimes we're left to our own imagination, which can sometimes be worse than what actually happened. So you just have to get that out of your head. The humor thing, definitely. And some of it, too, is once you become friends with these people, sometimes it's not even about cases that have happened externally. Sometimes it's internal stuff that's going on where you hear about an officer being in an officer-involved shooting or something like that. So there's also some of that, this is my family, that this stuff is happening to sometimes. So there's a little bit of stressors with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been pretty much said. Everybody finds their way of coping. For me, I love my quiet time, and I love punishing myself working out. And those two things seem to do it for me. Family, friends, joking around with people. You just gotta find what works for you.
I try not to work out. I try to eat my emotions. I think with our job as advocates, every time the phone rings, every time you get called out, it's like the person's top 10 worst day of their life. Like, it's always crisis. So we really try as a team, we do self-care days where we, just try to do something other than work. We try to just kind of, do little team activities and stuff like that. We had our EAP, which is an employee assistance program. A lot of companies have it, and our city has that. And so they had a counselor come once a quarter to do stress debriefings with us, just to kind of get it out, because you just soak in so much. But we also, one thing that through those debriefings, what we've learned is just daily appreciation. Like, it's just so simple, just being appreciative of what you have, because you do see horrifying situations. You are in the midst of, you're with family members who just lost their family member to a murder, and they're sobbing on you, you're holding their hands, and so you walk out of there, and of course you have to kind of release it sometimes. And so, but just being able to wake up and say, what am I really appreciative for, and be grateful for what you have, because people's lives, we see it all the time, people's lives change in a moment.
I think she nails it best by saying, you just appreciate your life more. You appreciate your family, you appreciate your friends, opportunities, everything that you have in your life, you appreciate it just a little bit more. I'll share, when I was 14, my 15-year-old sister was killed in a car accident. First fatal accident I went on was, I was up in Lakewood, and it was a head-on collision, and the female who died had the same hair as my sister. So then after that, my training officer goes, you doing all right, first fatal? He didn't know my background. Yeah, I'm all right. All right, let's go make some notifications to the family. So it's now you're going and talking to the family, hey, your loved ones, it was a married couple that was out on date night, wrong way, drunk driver came and hit him, so you appreciate your life a little bit more.
Well, I guess I got a different perspective for all these folks on the panel, because if you make it through to the end, It's a great life. And, you know, when you're in the middle of all this stuff, you're immersed in all the issues and what people are thinking and what my job is right now. Your CSPD or your police, wherever you're at, centric or your job centric. There's so much more out in the world. And it's what really helps me. There's a couple things when you retire. I've seen a lot, you know, running a homicide unit, Adrian will tell you, I forgot how many bodies I've seen. And same way with the young guy, I forgot your name, you weren't there when I was there, but I know those crime scene investigators. But I always tried to say, you know, it isn't as bad for you as it like it is for somebody in dispatch. When Jason Galinsky was killed, I'll always remember this. She was a student here, and she was kidnapped and brutally murdered. And we couldn't find her. We had every unit in town looking for her. And those communication center people and the patrol officer just did a great job, but they did a great job, but they couldn't stop the murder. And so I was asked to come to the communication center the next day and just give a briefing. And I remember coming to the communication center, it was packed. I said, what are all these people doing here? And all of a sudden, all the cops that were working on their time off were there. And I had veteran police officers and police sergeants, and they just want a briefing. And I told them what I could tell them. And you know, I finally realized I just had to say that, listen, there was nothing any of you could have done. It's beyond all of us, because they cared so much and they couldn't. And so I always felt that people that were shielded and not seeing that probably took it harder than I did. You know, it's harder to be in a place where you can't do anything about it, as opposed to, well, I can get a team of investigators going, I can get this thing solved, I can make sure the evidence is taken care of, I can make sure that we get this case prosecuted. So I always try to defer that to kind of the job at hand. But when you retire, that's a great technique. And you build up some pretty cool walls, and you can go in and do all this stuff. But when you retire, your mind tells you you're not a cop anymore. And then all of a sudden, all that stuff starts coming down. And every once in a while, I wake up in a few of those scenes. And so it never goes away, but you learn how to deal with it. Just exactly what everybody says. I fish, I golf. I shouldn't golf because it's the most frustrating thing in the world. I can't get better. But anyway, human resiliency, like Joel said down there, is and I tell you, when we pick people, we look at that. We look at how they handle that, things in their life that didn't go straight. And it's a skill that you can develop, and it's a skill through talking with people and talking to professionals that you can get through this career and be just fine at the end. That's what I'd say after 34 years. Might lose your hair, but it's stylish.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to pick just a few more questions. That way we have 15 minutes instead of 30 minutes for student questions. So students, if I didn't ask your specific question.
I'll take it from there. I think I've been involved in a lot of conversations about transparency. And there's a tremendous balance that we have to strike with transparency. And our number one goal is justice, is bringing justice and bringing the best investigation that we can to whatever the situation is. And you can't do that by giving up all the secrets of that investigation, but you can be very transparent. And we've learned a lot as every law enforcement, and the post-Ferguson term is now a term that every law enforcement officer knows. And you even saw legislation change for officer-involved shootings as a result of everything that's going on post-Ferguson. So now what you're seeing is a change in investigative focus is that we can no longer be a part, we have to have another law enforcement agency do our officer-involved shootings, for example. And we're even looking at those for criminal acts. You have officers that get in trouble, that there are a few bad seeds out there. Who's going to do those investigations? We're having those discussions so that we can be more transparent and provide a good investigation that the citizens of our community can wrap their arms around. But having said that, we have always done that really well with Colorado Springs, I think. We've always engaged community groups, as Rod was saying, and we continue to do that. We continue to be very progressive in how we establish even task force or committees so we can reach out and engage our community. So I think that's something that we've done very well.
Well, I'll echo what they're saying, that we've always been very fortunate that we've had command staff and chiefs that for many decades now have reached out and been in contact. That being said, we're also developing what's called the Minority Relations Advisory Committee. What that's designed to do is that the realization came that the head of the pastors union may be telling the chief one thing, but when you're actually at the church talking to all the people, they might be talking about something different. So what we're going to do is we're going to have officers fan out to churches, community groups, Hillside Community Center, any place that we can have an audience, we're going to fan out to. And there's not going to be a lot of defensiveness or anything like that going on, but you talk to us and you tell us what you think. So I hope people can see that we're trying to get it from all levels about the concerns that people have. Sometimes when, I guess it all goes back to communication, because sometimes about what police are doing is communicated poorly. And then let's face it, there's been a few bad apples over the last year or two that have really impugned our profession. And on that, I'll say, ours is a profession that it takes one guy or girl to impugn 700,000 people that are doing a good job. And I'd also like to say that we are looking at our policies, we are looking at our procedures, we are looking at, well, how do we make our contact policies better? When I say contact, like a Terry stop, if you guys know what that is. So I see you with a backpack at 3 a.m. in an apartment complex, like, why am I contacting you? And what is my authority to do what I'm about to do? What authority do I have to detain you? What authority do I have to search you? What authority do I have to touch you down for weapons? Looking at that and then realizing, hey, are we in tune with national standards here? The other thing that we do too is that as an internal affairs unit, we look at every single consent decree of departments nationwide. So there's departments nationwide, like Seattle's a big one that's been on it just recently, where they're on a consent decree. Well, why are they? And what did they do to get there? And is there something that we're doing that exposes us to that same type of risk? Does that make sense? So we're not just sitting back, crossing our fingers, hoping nothing happens. If that helps answer the question too.
Perfect. Great. So I'm going to open the floor to the students right now. If I didn't get to the question that you emailed me, you're more than welcome to ask that question or any other questions that you have thought of while you have been listening to these amazing professionals. So don't be shy. This is your chance to ask questions of these amazing professionals who have taken their time to come here. So go ahead.
I guess just a general question, but mainly for the victim advocate type stuff. Like, I know that CSPD does internships, but can you do specialized internships? Like, if you want to be mainly focused on victim advocates, can you do that? Or, like, probably not bomb squad, but I'm not sure. Is it just, like, in general, and then, like, oh, we need interns in this section, so we're going to send you over there? Or can you actually choose where you go with your internship?
You can. So our city has a volunteer services, and they're the ones that work with volunteers and with people who want to intern. And so you can go online to springscaps.org, and then they kind of have a list of just different areas, different departments that look for volunteers and interns. For our particular unit, we have an academy. We have a 12-week academy that we do once a year, and that's how we train our volunteer to become advocates, because we train them to be basically us that go out and go out on calls and things like that.
So I'll tell you that if you decide CSPD or El Paso County Sheriff, I handle both of those, and I try to really work with Gene Krause, who runs that CAPS program, to try to get the student into where you need to be. Even with the El Paso County Sheriff, there's availability with the coroner, so I can really work to specialize if that's what you want to do, to try to get you into those areas.
So student would contact you and, okay.
Or CSPD or the Sheriff's Office.
Perfect. And Rod's email is on SPA website. Okay, anybody else? Go ahead.
My question is for the CID guy. So, like, what is the process into getting like selected for CID? Because that's what I want to do.
Going in the Army?
Yeah, because I just
like really
wanted
early
to-
on in my career.
I just did the reserves, and my recruiter told me about it.
It's a big packet, you know, you gotta fill out, you gotta get that top secret clearance. So as a packet that you do, you get a bunch of, it doesn't matter what MOS you're in when you're in the Army, what your job is, because so you gotta be in the Army to begin with, and then you apply. It could have changed by now, so I don't know if I'm the best one to ask for that process, for sure. But you gotta fill out application, you gotta get your background check, they go to your hometown and any place you live, talk to everybody that's ever been involved with you, and teachers, just to see get a picture of what's going on. And then after you get selected, you go to a big investigation school. They teach you everything, crime scene, investigations, you name it, interview, interrogations. You get your hand on a little bit of polygraph stuff, just a little bit, just to kind of get you a little curious. So I think you would be best served if you went and asked an Army recruiter.
Well, yeah, because that's what I did, and like, they didn't tell me anybody. Like, I can ask like who was in
Or
it.
call a local CID office. I'm sure, on Fort Carson rather. I'm sure those guys would be happy just to kind of chat with you because, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough that it's been a while.
Okay, anything else? Go ahead.
This is for Jessica. Okay, so I know that you have a little girl. Is it a little girl or a little boy?
A girl.
A girl. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought you said. So I'm actually wanting to go into the crime scene investigation as well, and I do want to start a family. So like, I know you said how you cope. Is that like, I guess like your parenting skills? Do you see yourself a little bit more overprotective of your little girl because of what you do see?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So
I think I see myself doing that as well.
So the first SID test that I went on was unsafe sleeping. So I went home and my daughter didn't sleep with anything in her crib. So still to this day. So no, it definitely does, but kind of like what they said too, you definitely don't want to overdo it because then you're just gonna make yourself go crazy. So you learn very quickly to definitely deal with it, but as long as if you have your family and you have a great support system, you'll be just fine. Like I am so blessed that I have an amazing family that helps me through everything, especially as being on call. I have somewhere to take my daughter, so you just have to have that really good support system and then find the things that make you okay, and you'll be just fine.
Gabrielle, you have a question?
This is a little off-topic question, feel free not to answer, but just for the bomb squad, are you anticipating any attacks from like ISIS surviving happening?
Well, anticipating as far as today, do we always train for it and plan for it? Absolutely. We're the only bomb squad in town, just real quick how it's set up. The FBI and the federal government designates different bomb squads. They pay for all of our training, they pay for all of our gears, they fly us all around the country. Chris is about to be gone for another 6 weeks. So we're the only bomb squad in town. With that being said, we know that any type of attack or IED that we see here in Colorado Springs, whether made by domestic or international individuals, is something we're going to have to deal with. So we're constantly training with the military, with our counterparts in DOD, different agencies and different bomb squads around the state and the nation. And then several of us have secret clearances when we go for briefings and things like that. And it's definitely something that's on our radar, it's something that we always consider because like I said, we are the only game in town. So we kind of have to be ready for it. But as far as, are we safe here? Absolutely. Do I still let my family go out to the mall and things like that? Sure. But that's, again, it's something you kind of have to weigh.
And when something does happen, I mean, we're total students of our profession, so I guarantee we're starting to get briefings handed down to us and stuff like that. We're studying stuff up just so we can stay current on the most current trends and things like that we're seeing in terms of MO and construction materials and things like that, just so we can stay current and contact us.
There's a one behind you and then we'll get to you.
So just like, if you guys could sit down and like talk to the citizens, because ISIS is a really big deal right now.
our preparation, like what we can do to help you guys, because like there's a lot more citizens than there are police officers, and like I work in the mall, and like that's something we haven't been trained for. Like if something like that happened, we'd be like chickens with their heads cut off because we
Or
don't
just
talk
any
about it.
mass shooter situation, right? Not
Yeah,
just
like
a
if
terrorist
anything
attack.
happened, like I mean, like my brother's like you, so how what you do to your husband, that's what I grew up being taught. So like that's why I know some of those things, but like in a lot of ways, I feel like as citizens, we're not as prepared as maybe we could be, or not as informed as we could be. And like it's our fault. It's like I avoid the news because it scares me. So that's my fault. But like, do you guys have any like suggestions, like that? Hey, you know, as a citizen, this is something that you could do to be the best that you could be.
There's a lot of different things that is something that we need to do better on as a law enforcement agency, and we're working on it. New York, for instance, has developed something called "See Something, Say Something." You guys ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really just getting your community aware and involved. And honestly, for us to be able to stop the next attack, it's really going to be based on our intelligence that we're getting, and a lot of that is really based on the citizens and them just being aware. You know, can I take the time to teach everybody that works at the mall all the different components and everything to look for and the different types of tactics and techniques that we're seeing ISIS use? No. But we can stress a general awareness just of your surroundings, you know, what's going on. If you see something suspicious, are you calling it in? Back in the day, back before you guys' time, Ron will know what I'm talking about. There was almost more of a sense of community with people. When you saw something out of place, you called in, and now we're so absorbed, and I say we, me included, you know, walk through the mall now, and kids aren't looking around, they're looking at their phones. And everybody's so focused on what they're doing themselves that a lot of times we lose touch with what's going on around us. To help us with our security, having everybody and go to Israel and see. People are aware of their surroundings over there because they've been dealing with that for decades and decades, ever since they became a country back in 1948 again. We don't have that level of awareness right now because honestly, we've been living in a different time and really kind of a blessed situation. Is it always going to be like that? I don't think so.
I was just gonna add to that, not from a police perspective, but there's a really good book that came out, like, I read it in college, so at least, I'm not gonna say how many years ago. But it's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker, so if anybody, you should check that out. It's really applicable in today's times because of what he just said, that we are so focused on other things right now that we're not paying attention to our surroundings, and it just talks about raising awareness of your surroundings. Just throw that out there.
And just piggybacking off of that, it goes beyond, you know, terrorism or anything like that, but any kind of bad situations, just have a plan. You know, so many people are just wrecked by indecision. And just, what should I do, what should I do, what should I do? I feel like I should be doing something, but I just don't know what. So think about where you're at normally, whether it be at home or at work or at school, you know, and start just thinking about, okay, if something happens, this is what I'm going to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be retaliatory. It can just be, I know where the exits are. You know, I'm always going to have my cell phone with me. I have these emergency numbers programmed into my phone. Because not only, once you have that mental template built up, not only can you react quicker, but that you can also have some peace of mind to know that you're at least mentally prepared should something happen. It's just, and so if you see, I'm just like Teresa, I'm terrible about sitting in a restaurant and, you know, I mean, I'm not, even walking to my kid's school, I'm not, you know, I'm looking at all the other parents in the eye like, am I gonna have to do something to you, or, you know? So, you know, it's constant, you know, and so if you see one of us just kind of sitting there, you'll get every now and then 1,000-yard stare, where it just looks like we're looking at nothing. It's because we're thinking about all that stuff 24/7. So at least, you know, general public, it's just have a plan, you know, just have a game plan, have a mental template, and you're going to be way ahead of the curve.
And be a good witness.
Absolutely. We had a question in front.
So mine's not quite as deep as that question. It's kind of flip-flop, but the common theme I realize is a lot of you guys didn't know what you wanted to do when you were in college and whatnot. But in this field, do you feel like there is something for everyone to do if you're interested in this particular?
This is one thing I can step up on. I had no clue in college. Went in and I was an occupational therapy major, and then I went to like social services and like child psych was one of my minors. no clue. Got out, went in the Army, and that's pretty much where I got the bug. You know, I saw something, not that I always thought I wanted to do, but always interested me when I went in the Army, way back when. And that, for me, is how it all just kind of got started, because, you know, I just, like, you guys are probably feeling like, oh, I really like this, I really like that, you know, and that's how I was. And then in school, I kind of grabbed onto something I thought spoke to me. And then in the Army, I once again grabbed onto something, and that's how it happened for me, at least.
And there is something, I mean, there's so many different disciplines that you can do regarding law enforcement, that there really is something for everybody. You know, in school, it was either going to be law enforcement or I was going to follow the family business and go be a professional trombone player, which is not nearly sexy. So the big thing once I actually got here was I really wanted to focus on doing the investigations track. You kind of end up feeling every now and then like you're pigeonholing yourself into a certain career field within law enforcement. It's like, oh, I want to go be a detective or whatever. Well, I did that for 4 years, and I thought it's what I really wanted to do, and it didn't turn out that way. So then it's like, okay, well, what else can I do? And it's like, okay, I'll just go be in the hospital and be a professional 11-year-old. But you know, there's so much else that you can do in terms of, you know, the polygraph stuff, the criminal science aspect of things, the criminal psychology. You know, even the computer forensics. Our guys are absolute freaking wizards, and God bless them, because I couldn't do it. You know, I couldn't sit in my office and just look at a terminal all day. But they love it, and they've been doing it forever, and they're excellent at it. You know, and there's other stuff that you will figure out if you get involved in law enforcement that there is absolutely no way that you'd ever do something like that. I talk to other guys in patrol; they think I'm nuts. You know, but then I think that guys in sex crimes are crazy because I couldn't. I mean, I absolutely 100% believe that I could do that job for about a month and a half and be really professional, and then I would just burn out. I'd have no taste for it anymore. And so a lot of it just becomes, you kind of find what motivates you and grab onto those little tiny things, and then you'll also find that things grab onto you and you just get sucked in. So there's something for everybody, absolutely. It's really more just about, are you a good person? I'm serious, because now it's getting to be so, people in general are just getting so cynical about not necessarily law enforcement, but the professional community in general. It's like, are you motivated for the right reasons? And if so, then chances are there's a place for you somewhere in law enforcement agencies. So.
I would say the other thing that might be echoed here is it's different every day. So whether it's a discipline where you might sit in front of a computer every day, it's still different. So it's not just the same old data entry, it's different stories, it's different experiences for every aspect of law enforcement. So
I can tell you one thing, we made a lot of decisions on who to hire and who not to hire. If you have integrity and good character, we'll find a place for you.